Chapter 565. For a moment, Qin Dongchao even thought that the current situation was a trap set up by Li Tianlan and Han Donglu. They offered the same amount of money to buy 10% of the Colin family's shares. And this 10% was not 10% of the entire Colin family, but 10% given by the Colin family to Li Tianlan. In the Lin clan's estimation, the Colin family could at most give Li Tianlan 30% of the shares. 10% of the 30% was 3%. They used nearly 20 billion to buy this 3%. With their assets at this level, such an acquisition was no longer a question of value. Even if the 3% of the Colin family was really worth it, no one would buy it. A huge amount of money was thrown into it, and what they could get back was just some dispensable dividends. What was the use of this 3% for a small shareholder who didn't even have the daily decision-making power of the Colin family? No matter where this money was placed, it could generate more than this amount of income. But when Han Xinyan really took out the contract from the briefcase and handed the pen and paper to Li Tianlan, Qin Dongchao really realized how outrageous everything in front of him was. The contract was printed with the seal of the Flourishing Age Fund and Han Donglu's signature. That was to say, as long as Li Tianlan signed his name with the pen, the contract would take effect immediately and the deal would be over. How could this be? How could this be? Qin Dongchao's mouth kept trembling. As the boss of the Flourishing Age Fund, did he really have so much money that he didn't know how to spend it? This is 20 billion, not 200 yuan. Even Li Tianlan was a little stunned. He subconsciously took the pen and paper handed over by Han Xinyan. For a moment, he was a little hesitant, not knowing whether he should sign or not. He wanted to tell Qin Dongchao 10% of the shares before, but that was the attitude of the other party asking for a sky-high price. In fact, this 10% was as outrageous as the 70% that Qin Dongchao wanted. If he took a step back, there would be room everywhere. However, Han Donglu directly set the shares at 10%. Is he really crazy? Is it fun to throw money like this? Han Donglu, we are sitting here talking about business. Do you have to make things difficult for me? Qin Dongchao took a few deep breaths. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. His tone became calm again. I'm happy to spend some money to disgust you, Han Donglu said with a smile. Qin Dongchao's eyes sharpened. When he was about to speak, Han Donglu waved his hand and said, well, I can't spend money casually. Everyone is the same. But Qin, you are really stingy. I said 10% of the shares of the Colin family is 10%, and I mean 10%. This is the sincerity of the shares of the Colin family. I mean 10% of the shares of the Colin family. This is the sincerity of the shares of the Colin. Li Tianlan glanced at Han Donglu with doubts in his eyes. And then he said with Han Li, he smiled and said, Qin is, and Qin, Lui. He didn't Qin Tianli. He Donglu. Qin Dongchao felt a little helpless. He was the first to talk to Li Tianlan about cooperation. He just wanted to get some benefits. In business, he would not refuse to get more from Li Tianlan. He knew that 70% was a little outrageous, but the lowest expectation in his heart was about 30%. Moreover, Qin Dongchao was confident that if there was no accident, this price could be negotiated. But the accident happened. The Flourishing Age Fund, which could no longer be described as rich, intervened and became a sucker to show its so-called sincerity. In this way, if Qin Dongchao wanted to offer a high price, Li Tianlan would sign unless he was a fool. Mr. Qin, the Colin family doesn't care how many shareholders it has. With the Flourishing Age Fund, the Qin family can also have the Colin family. I can transfer part of the shares the Colin family sold to me. If you are interested, we can talk about it. Li Tianlan said with a smile, but he was a little excited. Almost no one knew that he had taken the first step in taking root in Eastern Europe, which started when he just signed his name on the contract. He exchanged 1% of the shares of the Colin family for 20 billion yuan. With the support of the Flourishing Age Fund, Li Tianlan could use the money to buy the core business of other families. What Li Tianlan held in his hand was the core bargaining chip of the whole of Eastern Europe. If he showed a little bit, there would be many people who were willing to buy it at a high price. Li Tianlan's wealth would increase, and so would his assets. The entire East Emperor Palace was completely on the right track in this uneventful morning. Qin, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Dong Chao was silent for a while, then nodded and said, "The Qin family will also show enough sincerity. I want 10% of the shares of the Colin family held by your highness. As for the price, it's the same as Han Donglu's." Li Tianlan nodded, asked Dongqing Rushi to take a document, and put it in front of Han Donglu and Qin Dongchao. This is the letter of intent of each family, including the number of shares they are willing to sell to me and the price. I believe this is only the first one. There should be new families joining in later. You too can choose something you are interested in. As for the price, I won't let you suffer a loss, but I won't suffer a loss myself. There's no need to read it. Han Donglu pushed the document to Qin Dongchao, looked at Li Tianlan, and said with a smile, "The Flourishing Age Fund wants a share of these businesses. I brought the professional team of the Flourishing Age Fund this time. You will receive the offer from the Flourishing Age Fund before tonight." Qin Dongchao's eyes twitched. He glanced at Han Donglu and said sarcastically, "The Flourishing Age Fund is indeed the leading financial giant, but there are many industries in it. Han Donglu, aren't you afraid of choking to death?" "Industries?" Han Donglu glanced at Qin Dongchao. For some reason, the patriarch of the Qin clan suddenly felt that the eyes of the financial giant in front of him became extremely strange for a moment. Then he shook his head with a smile and said softly, "How can this be an industry? This is the whole of Eastern Europe. The business of the Flourishing Age Fund will expand to Eastern Europe recently, so I can buy as many of these things as Tianlan has. Money is not a problem." Li Tianlan laughed. His attitude was actually the same as Han Donglu's. When he was in control of Eastern Europe, he could have as many partners as Han Donglu. Projects and shares were not a problem. In the face of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, his ambition had been burning uncontrollably. He wanted to build a real empire based on Eastern Europe. The more people joined this feast, the more partners he would have, and the more stable the empire would be. Today was only the first day. But the Flourishing Age Fund and the Qin clan had joined in and become the giant pillars that could support his entire empire as stable as a rock. After the chaos in Eastern Europe, the new era had not yet arrived. But the empire belonging to Li Tianlan had already taken shape. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 566. Everything was as Qin Dongchao and Han Donglu had expected. Just after noon, the number of people visiting Li Tianlan suddenly increased. The patriarchs of the wealthy and powerful families in various fields in Eastern Europe seemed to have made an appointment. They came one by one. For most of the afternoon, Li Tianlan was busy entertaining guests. No matter how arrogant Li Tianlan was, he would not neglect those who gave him money and power. These were the real distinguished guests, so his smile was always warm, kind, and extremely gentle. The people who came to visit at this time naturally knew the rules. Although they wanted to communicate with Li Tianlan more, they also knew that if they did not leave, they would not only offend those who were waiting to see Li Tianlan, but also offend Li Tianlan. Therefore, the patriarchs of the wealthy and powerful families were extremely happy. After putting the letter of intent in front of Li Tianlan, they went straight to the point. For Li Tianlan and the patriarchs of the wealthy and powerful families, cooperation was very necessary and irresistible. With this premise, it was easy and pleasant to talk about business. Although such cooperation was not finalized in a few words, the one who took the longest time only sat in front of Li Tianlan for less than 30 minutes. What surprised the patriarchs of the wealthy and powerful families the most was Li Tianlan's generosity. What each family brought this time was their core business. The number of shares they were willing to sell to Li Tianlan showed their sincerity. Naturally, no one was willing to give more, but no one dared to give less. Before they came, they were even prepared to be lowered by Li Tianlan. This was a very normal thing, but the most abnormal thing was that no matter how much they offered, Li Tianlan agreed without hesitation and stated that the funds would be in place in the near future. No matter what level the business was at, such a straightforward man was rare. When the patriarchs of the wealthy and powerful families left, they were satisfied and had great expectations for future cooperation. The continuous reception officially ended at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was still raining in Reki City, and the sky was gradually dimming. The light was on in the study. Li Tianlan held a letter of intent and looked at it carefully. In front of him, there was a thick pile of letters of intent from each family. Li Tianlan looked at the letter of intent in front of him, his eyes filled with satisfaction. He didn't care about the price at all. Anyway, he had no money. No matter how much the other party offered, he couldn't afford it. However, with this letter of intent in his hand, a large number of people couldn't wait to pay for him. In this way, lowering the price became meaningless. What Li Tianlan needed to do was very simple. Sign, take the money, pay, and then sit back and wait for the money. It was a pleasure working with you. It seems that people from Zhongzhou State should be transferred here to deal with these things. Li Tianlan put the letter of intent aside and sighed with emotion. Tribulation was in charge of the Snowdance Corps, so there was no need to worry. But he couldn't count on the iron-blooded soldiers of the Snowdance Corps for the cooperation at present. It involved dozens of wealthy families and countless core businesses, and the funds involved were unimaginable. In this kind of cooperation, both the investment and the income every day were enough to drive people crazy. Li Tianlan knew himself well. At least he couldn't handle these businesses with ease. Moreover, among the people he knew, there didn't seem to be any talent in this field. Except for Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan was silent for a while. I'll call my family and ask them to send someone over. Dongqing Rushi, who was accompanying Li Tianlan, said. Li Tianlan was stunned. Dongqing Rushi misunderstood him and said, "Don't you trust us?" "No, it's just that I didn't expect the Dongqing clan to have such a talent. Even if there is, it won't be easy to transfer them over, will it?" Li Tianlan laughed. "I'll figure it out." Dongqing Rushi was full of confidence. She paused and continued, "Han Xinyan can also help. You tell Han Donglu and he will agree." Li Tianlan nodded. It was such a big cooperation. No matter how ambitious Han Donglu was, he couldn't let go completely. If Han Xinyan stayed, she could not only help but also reassure the flourishing age fund. Li Tianlan reached out and pinched Dongqing Rushi's nose. When he was about to speak, the phone suddenly rang. It was Qin Weibai's phone call. Li Tianlan picked up the phone and said with a chuckle, "You're up?" On the other side of the phone, Qin Weibai. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." After a pause, she snorted with dissatisfaction and said with hatred, "You're not satisfied that I'm not tortured to death by you, are you?" Li Tianlan laughed, and his eyes inadvertently met Dongqing Rushi's. Dongqing Rushi's eyes were clear, and her face was innocent. Li Tianlan subconsciously stopped smiling and coughed. "Where are you?" Qin Weibai asked softly. "Still in the hotel." Li Tianlan patted the letter of intent beside him and said, "I dealt with some things." Qin Weibai was silent for a few seconds, and then said softly, "I'm leaving." Li Tianlan paused and looked up at his watch. "Mormons?" "Yes." "I'll see you off." Li Tianlan stood up without hesitation and hung up the phone directly. "Wait for me." Dongqing Rushi stood up and took a coat from the hanger. Li Tianlan hesitated, held her hand and said, "Little Bai is here, but she's leaving soon. Come with me to see her off." "Ah, sister?" Dongqing Rushi said and looked at Li Tianlan. "Were you with my sister last night?" There was no jealousy in her tone, only curiosity. But for some reason, Li Tianlan suddenly felt a little guilty. He said vaguely, found a coat for Dongqing Rushi, and put it on. "Let's go. I'll find someone to prepare the car." Because the distance between the two hotels was not far, it took Li Tianlan only 10 minutes to get to the hotel where Qin Weibai was. In the hotel room, Master of Samsara Palace was still sitting in front of the windowsill, looking at the wind and rain outside. Flaming Fire was sitting in the living room and drinking tea. The sound of a hairdryer was heard in the bathroom. Qin Weibai, in a white bathrobe, had just taken a shower. Her hair was wet, and she was standing in front of the mirror to dry her hair. Seeing him come in, Master of Samsara Palace turned around and nodded as a greeting. Flaming fire didn't even raise her head. Li Tianlan glanced at her and ignored her. He just looked at Qin Weibai standing in front of the mirror and said, "Why are you in such a hurry?" "Something came up and I have to deal with it." Qin Weibai sighed softly. She had promised Li Tianlan to attend the dinner tonight. She put down the hairdryer and walked out, sounding a little regretful. "Sister." Dongqing Rushi stood beside Li Tianlan and called. Qin Weibai was stunned for a moment, then smiled and touched Rushi's hair, saying softly, "Come in and sit down. Let me introduce you." Qin Weibai walked into the living room with Dongqing Rushi and said softly, "This is..." Dongqing Rushi, master of Samsara Palace, interrupted Qin Weibai. She glanced at Qin Weibai with calm eyes. "I know her." Qin Weibai was silent for a moment, then nodded and said to Dongqing Rushi, "This is my sister, master of Samsara Palace." Dongqing Rushi didn't ask master of Samsara Palace what her name was. Instead, she bowed seriously and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." Master of Samsara Palace glanced at her, and her eyes were a little intimate. At that moment, he didn't know whether it was an illusion or something else, but he seemed to vaguely see guilt in this touch of intimacy. He didn't know whether it was an illusion or a real emotion, but the master of Samsara Palace regained her indifference. She looked at Li Tianlan and asked, "Is Eastern Europe very lively today?" Li Tianlan answered, "Yes, mainly because my place is more lively." "I heard about it." Master of Samsara Palace said slowly, "Since all the big families want to be with you, this is a good opportunity. What's your plan?" "It's hard to say at the moment." Li Tianlan shook his head. "This is indeed a good opportunity, but the business is too big and many things are not easy to deal with. After returning home, I will arrange for people in this field to do business, to do big business, to the extent that it concerns the lifelines of several countries. I can't deal with it for the time being. If the Dongqing clan has talents in this field, they can borrow them first. Let me recommend 2 people to you." Master of Samsara Palace said. Li Tianlan took a deep look at her and asked, "Are they from Samsara Palace?" Master of Samsara Palace shook her head. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. When you were in a coma, there was a rumor in Reki City. It's very popular." Li Tianlan was a little confused. "The rumor is that the Qin clan intends to unite with you by marriage and betroth Qin Xianxia, the eldest miss of the Qin clan, to you." Master of Samsara Palace said. Li Tianlan touched his nose subconsciously, shook his head, and said, "Ridiculous." Of course, he had heard of this rumor, but he had never taken it seriously. He said, "It's true." Master of Samsara Palace said, "Qin Dongchao did have this idea. He even sent Qin Weiyun to test you, but was stopped by Qin Shilai. But for now, this is only temporary. As your business gets bigger and bigger, this idea will emerge from the Qin clan sooner or later. In this case, it's better to take the initiative to ask the Qin clan for Qin Xianxia. Come over?" Li Tianlan frowned. "I want to work for you, be your woman, and do anything." Master of Samsara Palace said lightly, "Don't worry, the Qin clan has no reason to refuse, and Qin Xianxia will not refuse. You don't even have to promise anything. As long as you ask, Qin Xianxia will appear in front of you immediately." Li Tianlan subconsciously glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes, looking like a sulking cat. She didn't speak, nor did Dongqing Rushi. "If you don't want to ask about this, I can help you. In business, Qin Xianxia is very useful and very useful. As for the other one, it's Han Xinyan. If you want Han Xinyan, you have to go to Han Donglu yourself. But Han Donglu won't refuse." Master of Samsara Palace suddenly smiled. "If you're willing, it's best to put Rushi in Eastern Europe. This girl looks silly, but when it comes to doing things, she's no worse than anyone else. The Qin clan and the Flourishing Age Fund are the 2 pillars that support your foundation. If you ask the young ladies of these 2 forces to come over, Rushi is fully capable of balancing the relationship between them." Li Tianlan frowned. Before he spoke, Master of Samsara Palace had already waved to Dongqing Rushi. "Come here." Dongqing Rushi hesitated and walked to Master of Samsara Palace. Master of Samsara Palace stood up, reached out, and gently touched Dongqing Rushi's head. Dongqing Rushi looked at her with her eyes wide open, a little confused. Since you're here today, how about I help you once? Master of Samsara Palace looked into Dongqing Rushi's eyes and asked. At that moment, the whole world seemed to become distorted and blurred. The messy wind and rain whistled and gathered in front of them. The raindrops were messy and cold. Heaven and earth were changing color, and everything was pale. The vast snow covered the city without warning. The tall buildings turned into mountains. The lone peak stood tall, and the world was vast. Dongqing Rushi's eyes were dazed and dull. Li Tianlan clearly saw that she took a step back with one foot, but her other foot was moving forward. Master of Samsara Palace's hand that fell on her head began to shine. It was colorful, and the sword intent soared into the sky. Dongqing Rushi stared at the sword light blankly. She retracted her foot that had stepped back. Master of Samsara Palace's palm fell. Dongqing Rushi suddenly opened her mouth. She didn't make a sound. But in that instant, everyone heard a silent and mournful scream. Dongqing Rushi spat out a mouthful of blood. Li Tianlan's face changed dramatically. He walked over and held Dongqing Rushi in his arms. He turned to look at Master of Samsara Palace, and his eyes suddenly became deep and calm. It's for her own good. Master of Samsara Palace took a step back, and her tone was a little tired. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, looked at Dongqing Rushi in his arms, and said in a deep voice, "How are you?" Dongqing Rushi blinked her blank eyes, and they became moist again. At that moment, the spiritual energy in her body seemed to be completely alive, and she became extremely agile. She even sounded a little happy. "I'm fine." As if she had broken free from some shackles, her voice was clear, cheerful, and extremely delicate. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 567. Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Rushi seriously. The scene in front of him seemed to be beyond his understanding, but vaguely he seemed to catch something. It was so vague that he was at a loss. After vomiting blood, Dongqing Rushi's breath was still stable. She seemed to have no injury, but her spirit became a little sluggish after the initial excitement. She leaned in Li Tianlan's arms, reached out her hand, and grabbed his ear. She murmured, "I'm so sleepy. I want to sleep. Go to my room." Qin Weibai said softly, "It's open until tomorrow. She can have a good sleep." Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weibai, nodded, and carried Dongqing Rushi. Her room was open until tomorrow. Did it mean that she had known that Dongqing Rushi would come? She had prepared for everything in front of her. He carried Dongqing Rushi to Qin Weibai's room. When he put her on the bed, Dongqing Rushi, who couldn't open her eyes, had fallen asleep. Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Rushi, who was sleeping sweetly on the bed, and was silent for a long time. He could feel that Dongqing Rushi wasn't hurt, but he could also feel her weakness. That kind of weakness wasn't because of her body, but because of the exhaustion of her willpower. As a result, Dongqing Rushi's realm directly regressed 1,000 miles. Perhaps no one had noticed that there was a genius among the younger generation of Zhongzhou state. That was Dongqing Rushi. She had been very close to the half-step invincible realm, but she looked too soft beside Li Tianlan, so people always subconsciously ignored her. But her previous realm had always been there. If they really fought against each other, no one dared to underestimate her. But now, in the blink of an eye, Dongqing Rushi's realm had slipped from the half-step invincible realm to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and then her breath became stable again. Li Tianlan slowly turned his head. Qin Weibai stood quietly beside him, also looking at Dongqing Rushi, who was sleeping. Her eyes were a little complicated, and she was in a trance. "What the hell is going on?" Li Tianlan asked, and his voice was calm. "This is indeed for her own good. No one wants to harm her, but in her current state, there is no good opportunity, and no one can help her. When she is by your side, her heart is the most relaxed, and it is also the time when her instincts are the most relaxed. Moreover, during this period of time, her condition is very good, so sister took the risk to help." Qin Weibai paused and continued, "The result is not perfect, but it's not bad. Li Tianlan nodded and said directly, I don't understand. Qin Weibai hesitated and said softly, Rushi ton. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He didn't want to lose his temper with Qin Weibai, but now he was really a little annoyed. First, it was because Dongqing Rushi's realm had regressed. Second, it was because of the negative emotions brought about by things that were beyond his control. He, who had become more and more used to controlling everything, especially disliked this feeling. He took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep puff. Her mental state is extremely poor now. Her injuries are not only physical, but sometimes mental injuries are even more serious. Her mental strength is at most half of her normal state. That's half. Qin Weibai said, Rushi's normal state has always been abnormal. Now she is really normal. She looked at Li Tianlan with gentle eyes and said quietly, Have you forgotten Dongqing Yueshan? It was as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water on his head in the dead of winter. Li Tianlan's body shuddered violently, and he could no longer speak. He had indeed forgotten. From Zhongzhou State to Eastern Europe, and then he and Dongqing Rushi were lying in the same bed. Li Tianlan couldn't remember how long it had been since he last saw Dongqing Yueshan's personality. In front of him, it had always been Dongqing Rushi, lively, obedient, well-behaved, and charming. The sharp personality that belonged to Dongqing Yueshan had never appeared from beginning to end. Rushi has two personalities. Dongqing Yueshan's personality is very independent, and she is also very aggressive. Silly Tianlan, that personality is not like this. She may not have any good intentions towards you. Just now, when my sister attacked, she directly crushed Dongqing Yueshan in the spiritual field and severely injured her personality in an instant. Although that personality has not completely disappeared, it is destined not to appear for a long time. Without the support of this personality, Rushi will naturally be weak. But now, Rushi is simply her. At this moment, Li Tianlan suddenly thought of a scene from a long time ago. It was the final battle of Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago. Before the final battle, on the night when they were investigating in Changdao, Dongqing Rushi's blade was indeed very close to his body at a certain moment. But it was stopped by Du Hanyin that time. After such a long time, Li Tianlan had long understood that it was Dongqing Yueshan who pretended to be Dongqing Rushi's personality at that time. If Du Hanyin hadn't taken action in time, it was hard to say what would have happened to Li Tianlan, who was completely defenseless against Dongqing Yueshan. Li Tianlan rubbed his forehead and asked, Why did Dongqing Yueshan want to kill me? Who knows? Qin Weibai's tone was a little cold, but it was not aimed at Li Tianlan. It's not surprising that this kind of distorted personality can do anything. Now, although my sister has hurt her badly, she hasn't completely destroyed her. Sooner or later, she will appear again. We have to find a chance to make her disappear completely. Li Tianlan smoked for a long time and then said slowly, I'll pay attention. Qin Weibai said no more. She took Li Tianlan's palm and said softly, It's safe here. Let her sleep. Let's go next door. I have something to give you. Li Tianlan silently turned around and closed the door. In the suite next door, Flaming Fire was not drinking tea. The master of Samsara Palace had stood up and was ready to leave at any time. Li Tianlan looked at her back, and his heart became more and more complicated. He took the initiative to say, If there's anything I can help Mormons with, just tell me. I'll do my best. Even those who didn't know about the dark world could understand the power of doing his best at this time. That was all the overt and covert forces of the Snowdance Corps, countless wealthy families in Eastern Europe, and even the entire giant group of Zhongzhou State, Sai City, and the Li family. This was Li Tianlan's full effort. No need. The master of Samsara Palace turned to look at Li Tianlan. After a long time, she shook her head and said, I can handle it. After a pause, she continued, Besides, it's my battlefield. Li Tianlan shook his head and said blandly, In my opinion, there's no need for this so-called battlefield to exist. It doesn't make sense to say this. The master of Samsara Palace laughed. Everything has started. It's too late. It's too late to say anything. The sky was completely dark. The strong wind and heavy rain fell from behind her. All the stories in this era, and all the grievances should be put to an end by someone. The master of Samsara Palace said softly, "The former chosen one will become a thing of the past, and the new chosen one has risen. Do you remember what I said? Don't let yourself down in anything in the world. Don't let yourself down and don't let him down. I once ended the era of the chosen one. Now, I'm opening a new era for the new chosen one." The master of Samsara Palace's smile was light and emotionless. My whole life." Her voice gradually deepened. "My whole life." There seemed to be a huge weight stuck in Li Tianlan's throat. He stared at the master of Samsara Palace in a daze and couldn't say a word. The master of Samsara Palace took a deep breath and took a notebook with a blue cover. She said softly, "This is for you." Li Tianlan took it and glanced at Qin Weibai subconsciously. The notebook in his hand was extremely old. It seemed to be the one that Qin Weibai had held before. Whether the content was the same or not, at least it was the same from the outside. This is, standing in the supreme realm of the Chosen One, his understanding of the Li family swordsmanship, the Wang family of Beihai's swordsmanship, and the 10 skills of true martial arts of Kunlun City. The master of Samsara Palace said slowly, "This is the martial arts belonging to the supreme realm." He killed many enemies in his life. He recorded all the martial arts that caught his eye. He also recorded his own evaluation, understanding, and coping methods, as well as his own way of using power and unique skills. These are the thoughts of the Chosen One. You can use them as a reference. Just take a look. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly trembled. He flipped through the notebook with a blank mind. The 6 paths of reincarnation sword. The 24 moves of sword. The 10th unique domain. The 30-meter mortal world. The glory of the holy hall. The shadow world. Reigning sword with Jifeng. Countless unique skills that shocked the dark world flowed on the paper one by one. Li Tianlan couldn't describe his feelings. If the dark world was a bigger Jianghu, then the thing in his hand was the so-called secret book that could make all the people in Jianghu crazy. This gift could be said to be extremely heavy, so heavy that even his fingers were trembling. Li Tianlan opened his mouth. "Don't refuse." The master of Samsara Palace said slowly, "This should belong to you. It should have been given to you." Li Tianlan's expression was complicated. He still didn't know what his relationship with Dongqing Huangtu was. But the existence of the Chosen One was no longer illusory. The blue notebook in his hand was the most important evidence. The real Great Way was in his hand. Deity of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital knew that he had no hope of becoming the Chosen One, so he took another path of the 24 moves of sword. He abandoned the illusory and pursued the ultimate reality. The master of Samsara Palace said softly, "In a sense, I'm the same as him. I can also see the path of the Chosen One, but I can't control his day and night. So I only took one side and reached the present realm. But you're different. I hope you can follow the path he took and finally embark on a path that really belongs to you." Li Tianlan held the notebook and pondered for a long time. Then he said blandly, "Day and night, reality and illusion." The master of Samsara Palace nodded. "It's perfect." Li Tianlan laughed. He looked into the eyes of the master of Samsara Palace and said with expectation and uneasiness that he didn't even notice, "You must live. You must live." The master of Samsara Palace took a deep look at him. His light voice seemed to come from far away, carrying with it countless emotions that seemed somewhat unfathomable because of the distance, like dark clouds drifting across the sky. "I'm leaving," she said. Chapter 568. Snow Country Mormons. Tian-Yin walked out of the ancient small castle expressionlessly. Facing the heavy rain, he did not look back. Deity looked at his back quietly, and his aura became more and more real. Since about half a year ago, every time the two met, they parted on bad terms. They had saved each other's lives more than once. They had gone through thick and thin together and fought side by side, but neither of them could persuade each other. With Tian-Yin as the leader, the cracks in the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital seemed to have become more and more obvious. Deity never sighed with emotion or wavered, just like his eyes when he looked at Tianyin's back at this moment. Apart from calmness, there was only stubbornness in his eyes. The wind and rain were like knives. Tianyin did not evaporate the rain around him. He walked against the heavy rain and wiped the rain off his face. It was cold and rainy in Eastern Europe, and the polar night was still the same. In the cold and dark environment, his eyes were as bright as cold stars, and he looked more and more indifferent. Daybreak, dressed in white, looked at Tianyin in front of the castle with a complicated look in his eyes. Tianyin nodded to him, but his footsteps did not stop. "How is it?" Daybreak took the initiative to ask. Tianyin paused and said hoarsely, "After the final battle, I will go to Tiannan." In his several conversations with deity, this was the final result. Tianyin was very satisfied with this result, but he definitely did not like it. He did not like this result, not at all. "Why do you have to do this?" Daybreak sighed softly. "Yes, why do you have to do this?" Tianyin repeated and shook his head. He walked into the wind and rain, and the two passed each other. "That's for the best." "Did you think about me when you went to Tiannan?" Daybreak suddenly asked. His tone was very slow, almost enunciating each word, with indescribable weight. Tianyin's steps forward suddenly stopped. He stood in the rain. The wind and rain, like knives, instantly wet his whole body. After a long time, Tianyin said slowly, "You and I have been friends for many years. I want you to tell me the truth. Do you think His Highness did the right thing?" Daybreak had nothing to say. He shook his head. "I will not question any decision made by His Highness. Not questioning doesn't mean he is right." Tianyin said faintly, "Wrong is wrong. For so many years, the Li family has been holed up in the border, and people have been coming out from there to go to the purgatory of heaven capital. But has your highness ever gone back once? Have you ever gone back even once? None of you know the life there. The Li family has suffered for so many years and been in despair for so many years. Everyone regards the young master as the Li family's future hope, a little hope squeezed out of despair. Now that I have come to the purgatory of heaven capital, he told me that the young master is not worthy, and you also think that the young master is not worthy. Huh, not worthy? The Li family has placed all its hopes on the young master for so many years. Your King telling me that he doesn't deserve it? But who do you think you are? What right does he have? What right do you have to say that I'm not worthy? Are you worthy? Simply preposterous. His voice was getting louder and louder. In the wind and rain, he stood in front of Daybreak, almost roaring to vent his long-suppressed emotions. Daybreak said nothing. He did not need to answer that question. Tianyin's every question was directed at His Highness. He was asking if His Highness was worthy. Did he deserve to deny Li Tianlan? Deity in the castle did not answer. He was quiet. Tianyin waited for a while and smiled self-mockingly. I will participate in this decisive battle, which can be regarded as an end to my days in the purgatory of heaven capital. But I am just the beginning. More and more people will leave here and the purgatory of heaven capital. I have no problem with him claiming to be deity. I have no problem with him saying that the young master doesn't deserve it. But in my eyes, he doesn't deserve it either. The purgatory of heaven capital doesn't deserve it. The wind and rain were absent-minded and cold. Through the rain, Tianyin looked at Daybreak in front of him and said in a cold and gloomy tone, "From today on, in my heart, the purgatory of heaven capital is the purgatory of heaven capital, and the Li family is the Li family. I will return to Tiannan. As for you and me, if I don't die this time, we will meet in Tiannan." Without saying more, he turned around and walked straight into the rain. Standing in the same place, Daybreak's eyes finally showed a touch of bitterness, even pain. Everyone in the purgatory of heaven capital knew that he was in charge of everything in Tiannan, and even the entire Sanluo Hall was there. Tianyin went to Tiannan and stood beside the so-called young master. If they met in Tiannan in the future, what would it be like? What would be the position of the two of them? It was better not to see them. Daybreak took a deep breath. They were brothers who had gone through thick and thin with him. But from today on, what were they? I will break through to the invincible realm in the near future. It's better not to see each other in the future. Daybreak's deep voice sounded and fell into Tianyin's ears from all directions. He was the second expert in the purgatory of Heaven Capital, except for deity. He had the real combat capability of the invincible realm. With the murderous weapon Shadow the Ripper in his hand, once he broke through, the strength of the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital would greatly increase. Tianyin's footsteps paused, but he did not stop. In the Dark World, there were very few experts who broke through to the invincible realm after the age of 40. For martial arts, 40 years old was a person's peak period, but it was also the period when one began to go downhill from the peak. But nothing was absolute. There were very few such people, but it didn't mean that there were none. After all, deity had made the achievements he had today even though his foundation was almost completely destroyed after the War of Treason. Daybreak stood where he was and watched Tianyin's back disappear. He didn't move for a long time. "Come in." Deity's voice sounded in his ear. Daybreak silently turned around and walked into the castle. Deity stood alone in the hall of the castle, admiring a medieval armor placed in the hall. Hearing Daybreak's footsteps, he shook his head slightly. "It's useless," he said. "We all know him very well. We were able to walk together because we were like-minded. Now we have different paths and can't work together. Let him go." "Do you think Tianyin is wrong?" Daybreak asked after a moment of silence. "Wrong?" Deity smiled. "We are not children anymore. How can there be right or wrong in everything in the world? There is no right or wrong in the world, but we do." Daybreak's voice trembled a little. "We are on the same side." Deity was silent for a moment and said blandly, "We used to be, but not anymore." He stretched out his hand and flicked the armor in front of him. The crisp sound of the collision spread throughout the castle, like the sound of a sword. "Don't think too much." Deity turned around and looked at Daybreak. "Business is more important. At present, there are more than 500 elites gathered in Mormons." Daybreak took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. "We are all on the same side and can be completely trusted." "Very good." Deity nodded. "Everyone be on standby." Daybreak nodded. He hesitated for a moment and suddenly asked, "We have to guard against Qin Weibai's sword." When the divine weapon of Lin and was born, Phoenix, who was nurturing her fetus in Lin, revealed the news to deity as soon as possible. Daybreak had already felt the power of the sword just from the oral description. Such a divine weapon was simply unheard of. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Deity had never heard of this sword. He was silent for a moment and finally shook his head. "It's okay. We have to guard against it." Daybreak repeated his words. "Of course, but this sword can't fall on me. Qin Weibai, that woman, except for Li Tianlan, I'm afraid she doesn't care about the whole world. If that sword is in her hands, she can only deal with Wang Tianzong. Others, including me, are probably not important in her eyes." Speaking of Qin Weibai, Daybreak raised his eyebrows. "According to the intelligence, she is now in Reki City. It's almost time to come back." Deity walked to the bed and looked out of the window. The wind and rain continued. In this place where there was no sunlight for 24 hours, the darkness seemed to have become the only eternal color. The darkness, the heavy rain, everything became more and more violent, colder, and more messy. Deity stared into the distance and whispered to himself, "It's about to start." The morning sun rose on Mount Dibbing. Summer Solstice, who was dressed in splendid clothes, solemnly walked out of the laboratory with a huge wooden box in her hands. In many cases, Firmament, who could represent the Wang family of Beihai in the Dark World, stood outside respectfully. As soon as Summer Solstice came out, Firmament's eyes fell on the wooden box in her hand. The huge wooden box was nearly 3 meters long and 1 meter wide. It was black and extremely heavy. Firmament's eyes suddenly became fanatical, and his body even began to tremble slightly. Summer Solstice handed the wooden box in her hand to Firmament and said calmly, "Take it to Eastern Europe and give it to Tianzong." Jio? Firmament's voice was messy and in a trance. "This is the coldness of 9 states." Summer Solstice whispered, "The first divine weapon in the dark world." Firmament took a deep breath and carefully held the wooden box. For a moment, he did not dare to move. "You go now." Summer Solstice said calmly, "The private plane is ready. Go now." "I'll go too." A voice suddenly sounded, warm and peaceful. Summer Solstice raised her eyebrows and turned her head. In her sight, a slender young man walked over with his back to the morning sun. The sun shone on him. Vaguely, every pore on his body seemed to be emitting a faint fire. Summer Solstice blinked. The young man walked up to her and whispered, "Mom, I'll go." "Xianxia." Summer Solstice looked at Wang Xianxia in a daze. For a moment, she felt that her son was a little strange. Since the final maneuver, Wang Xianxia, who was known as the heavenly son of Beihai, had been silent on Mount Dibbing. His sword strike at the cost of his realm was still easily defeated. No one knew what he had experienced in his heart after such a crushing defeat. On the day when the coldness of 9 states was cast, there was movement for the first time in the place where Wang Xianxia was silent and meditating. It was not until today that he really came out. At this moment, Wang Xianxia seemed to be no different from usual, but Summer Solstice always felt that there was something different about him. "I'll go to Eastern Europe with Firmament." Wang Xianxia repeated his request calmly. "But you're only—" Summer Solstice frowned. She wanted to say that he was only in the fire-flaming realm now, but as soon as she said it, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. Now Wang Xianxia was indeed still in the fire-flaming realm. But the fire-flaming realm could no longer represent his current strength. In Summer Solstice's perception, the current Wang Xianxia was completely a ball of fire. He looked gentle and calm, but he was always burning. Every flame was unimaginably hot and violent. At this moment, a word suddenly came to Summer Solstice's mind. "Rebirth from the fire." "How's your strength now?" Summer Solstice suddenly asked. Wang Xianxia thought about it seriously and said frankly, "I'm still no match for Li Tianlan." He paused and continued, "I mean Li Tianlan in the final maneuver state." Summer Solstice was silent for a moment. It was not long before the first day of the final maneuver. But now, Li Tianlan was obviously stronger than he was at the beginning. "You may not know yet." Summer Solstice whispered, "During this time, Jiang Shangyu kept breaking the realm overnight. Now he is a superior a half step to the invincible realm." Wang Xianxia raised his eyebrows and said, "I knew he was not simple." He knew what his mother meant, so he thought about it and said, "It's okay. Even if I can't beat him now, he can't beat me." He reached out his hand. A tiny flame appeared in his hand. The flame seemed weak, but it was beating very violently and endlessly. Summer Solstice's eyes lit up. That was the real emotion of amazement. Firmament's body tightened subconsciously. Looking at the flame in Wang Xianxiao's hand, his eyes were extremely solemn. Wang Xianxiao's tone was a little emotional and a little complicated. "The 4 realms of martial arts have delayed me for many years. It's good that you can figure it out." Summer Solstice smiled. At this moment, it seemed that even the rising sun had dimmed a little. She took a step forward, tidied her son's collar, and whispered, "Go ahead. Be careful." Wang Xianxia nodded, hugged Summer Solstice gently, and turned around. Firmament handed the huge wooden box in his hand to Wang Xianxia. Wang Xianxia took it. The huge wooden box shook slightly with a happy emotion. Wang Xianxia and Firmament went straight down the mountain and rushed to the airport at the foot of the mountain. There, the silver-gray special plane with the medal of Firmament and Sea engraved on the fuselage was ready. They would go directly to Eastern Europe. The whole of Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong, and the whole Dark World. Everyone was waiting for this sword. Summer Solstice turned and walked to her residence. Among her favorite flowers and plants, there was a crystal-clear jade guanyin statue. Summer Solstice knelt in front of guanyin, put her palms together, and looked extremely pious. She closed her eyes and whispered, "It's about to start." Reki City, the office of the president. Countless elites of the Snowdance Corps quietly surrounded the area of hundreds of meters around Wang Tianzong. Tribulation stood in front of the office of the president, his eyes focused. Cool breeze and drifting cloud. Phantom yin and yang. Li Zhonghu, Li Wangxing, Hua Qingfeng, high-level officials appeared behind tribulation one by one. Everyone was looking at the room in the ruins. Under the wind and rain, the room seemed to come alive and was trembling slightly, as if it was breathing. The sword intent all over the sky whistled in the room every time it trembled, sweeping through the night and driving the wind. The raindrops were completely torn apart by the sword intent. The tiny water droplets did not fall, but hung in the sky with the sword intent. There were more and more broken raindrops, and the water droplets were densely suspended in every corner of the office of the president. The room was still trembling slightly. In everyone's sight, the room was becoming more and more blurred and distant. No one could see the room anymore. No one could see Wang Tianzong either. In the blurry world, there seemed to be something. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Something was happening. It was slow and firm, but unstoppable. In the room, under the dim light, Wang Tianzong was still practicing calligraphy. His handwriting was getting fewer and fewer, and it was still decreasing. I'm the first among all the ambitious and ruthless people. There were no more eternal people. The ambitious and ruthless people were also disappearing. The handwriting finally had no you and me. Only the first one was left. Wang Tianzong's movements became more and more natural. The tip of the brush in his hand wandered on the white paper. At a certain moment, he no longer seemed to be practicing calligraphy. He seemed to have no strength at all and was as light as a feather. Only the brush, which seemed to be able to tear the whole world, was still wandering, driving his whole body and will. Sublimation. Upward. And to the peak again. In the increasingly blurred scene, an elite of the Snowdance Corps, who was guarding the outermost periphery of the square, walked in. He held a letter in his hand. He handed the envelope to the low-level officer above him. The low-level officer handed it to the middle-level officer, and the middle-level officer handed it to the high-level officer. The letter finally fell into the hands of Cool Breeze. Cool Breeze held the letter, and an ominous premonition suddenly surged up. His palm trembled subconsciously. He was not the recipient of the letter. The recipient of the letter was Tribulation. He hesitated and exchanged a look with Drifting Cloud. "What's wrong?" Tribulation's hoarse voice sounded. He turned his head. Cool Breeze subconsciously shrank his palm, then said with a wry smile, "Nothing." Tribulation's eyes fell on the letter in Cool Breeze's hand. "For me?" Tribulation asked. Cool Breeze's face darkened, and the ominous premonition in his heart grew stronger and stronger. "Give it to me." Tribulation stretched out his hand. "Your Highness," Cool Breeze opened his mouth. "Give it to me." Tribulation repeated. Cool Breeze gritted his teeth and handed the envelope in his hand to Tribulation. Tribulation looked at the envelope, narrowed his eyes, and opened it casually. In the wind and rain, a photo was pulled out of the envelope by Tribulation. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud looked a little confused. It was a woman in the photo. She was dressed in a white dress and had a delicate body. This was originally a woman who could be said to be devastatingly beautiful, but at this moment, half of her face was swollen. A deep scar ran from her chin all the way to her back, completely destroying the beauty of her face and making her look incomparably hideous. Droplets of blood splattered on her white dress as she stared blankly in front of her. Desperate and helpless. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud didn't know this woman, nor did they know what this photo was trying to show. Tribulation lowered his head and looked at it quietly. His eyes were cold and calm, so deep that there wasn't the slightest fluctuation in them. But this photo seemed to carry an unattainable weight. It slipped from his hand and fell into the wind and rain. The back of the photo appeared in Tribulation's sight. It was a line of Chinese characters. It was crooked, but every stroke carried a strong sense of anger and domineering. "My glory is in Mormons. Heretic, come and die." Heretic. There was only one force in the world that could use this word. The Vatican. And there was only one person in the whole Vatican who was qualified and confident to let Tribulation go and die. Saint War Angel Ars. But why did the Vatican believe that Tribulation would pass just based on this photo? Cool breeze and drifting cloud frowned. Almost at the same time, they thought of a message that no one in Sai City mentioned, but everyone had heard of. White dress. White dress. Holy Virgin Angel. Cool breeze and drifting clouds' expressions changed. Your Highness. Cool breeze called tentatively. Tribulation didn't speak or move. He kept his head down and looked at the photo in the rain. His aura was disappearing. All his vitality began to converge, and finally, there was nothing left. That was the extreme of the whole person. He was desperately converging and finally became barren. Cool breeze subconsciously reached out and touched Tribulation. Your Highness, he didn't finish his words. His palm passed through Tribulation's chest. Tribulation's figure began to twist and shake. He didn't know when it stopped where he was, but a shadow. Cool breeze, whose face changed dramatically, was about to turn around. In the room, Wang Tianzong's stroke fell again. There was only one word. What? One word was like a sword. In an instant, the hazy and violent sword energy broke through the room. A circular ripple swept across the whole square in the most fierce and arrogant manner, and finally went straight into the night sky. The vast and endless sword energy was like a dragon, surging like a tide. The hazy and clear sword light was endless, and it directly broke the whole sky. Wherever his vision passed, the entire sky was shattering, and black ripples appeared one after another in the transparent space. The messy rainwater seemed to fall from countless worlds, but it was shattered by the sword intent, turning into ice crystals one after another. There were more and more ice crystals. From top to bottom, they spread out in all directions and covered the whole square in an instant. With Wang Tianzong's room as the center, countless ice crystals with sword intent continued to spread out. Cool breeze kept turning around and froze in place. Drifting cloud stretched out his palm and froze. Li Zhonghu raised his head in confusion. Hua Qingfeng was frowning. The yin and yang phantom seemed to want to take a step. Tribulation's shadow was twisting. It froze. All froze. Tens of thousands of people, the whole square, and the whole Snowdance core were completely frozen in an instant. In other words, they were directly imprisoned in place by the unimaginable majestic sword energy. The whole square was dead silent in an instant. Everyone kept the posture of that moment, motionless. Only the sword intent was still whistling between heaven and earth and kept spinning. In the room, Wang Tianzong raised his head and looked to the south. His sight seemed to cross Eastern Europe, snow country, the vast Beihai, and fell on Mount Dibbing. The sun was rising there. The flowers were blooming there. As the breeze passed, the birds were singing and the flowers were fragrant. There were mountains and rivers, laughter, and people lived and worked in peace and contentment. The Wang family of Beihai had lived for hundreds of years because of the glory and brilliance brought by being invincible in the world. But now, at this moment, this night, the new glory was right under his feet. Wang Tianzong looked in that direction. His eyes were full of undisguised attachment and love, so heavy and affectionate. He would sweep through this era. Then he would return there and continue to rush to the highest peak with the Wang family of Beihai. He would go back. He must go back. Wang Tianzong clenched his fists. He looked at the island and the mountain in Beihai and whispered, "Wait for me." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 569. Under the wind and rain, Reki City was full of lights. Before the banquet in the Manlasai Hotel began, Wulan State and Zhongzhou State finally began to sign agreements one by one. Riker and Li Huaqing sat opposite each other. The hall was full of flashing cameras. Almost all the important figures in the two countries were witnessing this scene. The repeated signatures fell on different agreements. The entire Wulan State began to change quietly in the ignorance and cheers of all the people. Countless interests entered Zhongzhou State with these agreements. The world's most powerful hegemon country crushed over with undisguised toughness and sharpness. Sovereignty, reputation, freedom, hope, interests, and future. Everything began to break apart. Riker was expressionless. His palms were trembling violently, his mind was blank, and he was dizzy. He signed one name after another purely by instinct. After tonight, the former Wulan state would completely become a thing of the past. Everything in the future of this country would fall on him. He would be a sinner throughout the ages. Riker smiled absent-mindedly and signed his name on the last agreement. There was a round of applause around him, which was extremely ironic. The applause surrounded the entire training ground, and it was so lively that it was even a little absurd. The sun fell near noon. The clear and firm voice seemed to echo in everyone's ears. People clapped subconsciously, and their thoughts were in a mess. On the high platform, the enchanting and solemn short-haired woman walked down in everyone's eyes. She walked to the group of students of the Sky Academy. In an instant, almost all the students stood up and applauded desperately. The applause was fanatical. That day was the graduation ceremony of the Sky Academy. After Zhuang Huayang, the principal of the Sky Academy, and Chen Songlin, the dean of the Deep Sea Academy, respectively delivered their speeches, the representative of the East Emperor Palace, as a dark horse in the maneuver of the two academies, came to the stage and generally stated the plan of the East Emperor Palace for the next 3 years. This was the result of the East Emperor Palace's deliberate courtesy. Whether it was Zhuang Huayang of the Sky Academy or Chen Songlin of the Deep Sea Academy, both of them were generals. The real leader of the East Emperor Palace was now the marshal who represented Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe to expand the territory of the motherland. He fought unhindered, and his spirit was amazing. He would rather die than retreat. After the end of the first day of the final maneuver, the young man, who had shocked the dark world, had reached one high point after another. This was not just a rise, but a meteoric rise. If he were here today, Zhuang Huayang and Chen Songlin might not have the chance to speak first. At least Chen Songlin would be behind Li Tianlan. The representative of East Emperor Palace was Wang Yuetong. In the uproar, no one had recovered from Wang Yuetong's identity. The former little princess of the Wang family of Beihai had already announced the future direction of the East Emperor Palace. Tianan City. It was not until this moment that the entire Zhongzhou state discovered the true situation in Tianan. The Border Control Corps fell into the hands of the Wang family of Beihai, but the more than 100,000 troops of the Blood Battalion close to Tianan were still in the hands of the Dongqing clan. Ning Ziyuan, who supported the Li family and was eventually transferred from the Eastern Theater of Operations, was now the commander of the Tianan Freedom Corps. As for the Southwest Special Warfare Headquarters, Shu Mountain was the banker. Dongcheng Rushili Badian, Ning Chenqing. The 3 members of East Emperor Palace had been completely connected with Tianan. After returning from Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan stood in Tianan, and the support behind him was endless. What did this mean? After leaving a deep mark in Eastern Europe, the young marshal of the Li family had obviously made up his mind to leave his footprint in Tianan. It was not Jiangxia, the sphere of influence of the Li family. It was not Liaodong, the territory of Sai City. It was not Zhongyuan, the base camp of the Dongqing clan. It was Tianan, the land of more than 40,000 square kilometers, which had no clear ownership, was a bit backward. A land of rivers and mountains was picturesque. Wang Yuetong walked into the spectator stand of the students and shook hands with hundreds of students who had confirmed to join East Emperor Palace. They would leave Huading soon and go to Tianan. That was Li Tianlan's choice. He had chosen an incomparably broad stage, filled with carnage, deceit, intrigue, and slaughter. However, in the darkness that was mixed with blood, there was the brightest future and prospects for everyone. On this day, only Wang Yuetong came to the stage from East Emperor Palace, but hundreds of people stood at the same time. They were the most elite of the young generation in the past 3 years. They followed East Emperor Palace and went far away. Everyone was looking at this scene, and everyone saw a different meaning in this scene. Complicated emotions spread on the training ground of Sky Academy. Most people thought of Eastern Europe. On this day in Eastern Europe, the old era had just passed. On the same day in Zhongzhou State, a new era had begun. From beginning to end, Gu Xingyun, the so-called god of war in Zhongzhou State, had never appeared on the scene. Snow Country. In the Grand Palace, the president of Snow Country, who was born in the Violet family, received a man who was as strong as a giant with surprise. The man was tall, and his gray clothes looked a little dirty. His face was covered with countless tiny scars, and he looked extremely embarrassed. But he stood in the palace with his own momentum. Inside and outside the palace, all the palace warriors knelt on one knee. He had always been strong internationally. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. The president of Snow Country, who was even a little overbearing, strode over and gave the giant a big hug. Welcome back. The tone of the president of Snow Country, Xianxia, was sincere and emotional. This is my world. As long as I don't die, I will come back no matter what. The voice of the giant man was steady and thick. The president laughed heartily. For a moment, the compromise and concession that he had thought about before completely disappeared in his heart and turned into passion and heroism. He was the leader of this fighting nation, so of course, he should have a stronger desire to fight than anyone else. He looked at the giant in front of him and said in a deep voice, "What do you want?" "I want to get my things back." The giant's tone was flat. President Xianxia hesitated for a moment and then said decisively, "Of course, it belongs to you. I also want the polar bear." The giant's voice became deeper and deeper. "I need his strength." In the hearts of countless people in the dark world, the polar bear of Snow Country was not a big animal that lived in the polar region and was extremely ferocious but looked a little cute after being tamed. Instead, it was a cutting-edge force that was always protected by Snow Country and rarely used. That was the most elite force of the entire military of Snow Country. The military of Zhongzhou State had the most elite and most terrifying Thunderbolt Battalion. But under the Thunderbolt, there were also the Bloody Massacre, Black Dragon, Pegasus, and Polar Bear, in a sense, was the trump card of Snow Country. This was a force that could dominate the world. However, very few people knew that the so-called Polar Bear unit was actually two units. The former was the Arctic. The latter was the Bear. What the giant wanted was the Arctic Army and the Bear Army. President Xianxia took a deep look at him and said without hesitation, "Yes." The giant nodded and said, "Thank you." "No problem." President Xianxia's voice was serious and cold. "At this time, I can give you whatever you want. But the question is, what can you give me?" "Order." The giant's tone was calm. "I can give you order, an order that only belongs to our own people. Snow Country only belongs to the people of Snow Country." His voice covered the whole palace. All the palace warriors were shocked at the same time. The giant turned around and looked at the orderly figures of the warriors in the palace. He said calmly, "Who dares to fight with me?" There was a slight silence in the Grand Palace for a moment. In the next second, a furious, earth-shattering roar suddenly rang out, shaking the skies. "Fight!" Xiaodalin's expression became more and more serious. His eyes gradually became bloodshot. "Can I trust you?" Compared to others. The giant looked into his eyes and did not give in at all. "I am more trustworthy than them." Xiaodalin nodded and reached out his hand. "Your Highness, please." The giant walked into the palace hall. From this moment on, the accurate and conclusive news, centered on the palace of Snow Country, spread directly throughout the whole country, and then rushed out of Eastern Europe and continued to stir around the world. This was the official channel of the whole Snow Country, or rather, the ultimatum. On the night of August 24th in Eastern Europe, President Xiaodalin of Snow Country personally signed the battle leader. The Arctic Army. All the elites of the Bear Army. President Xiaodalin, in the name of Snow Country, officially declared war on all the dark forces staying in Eastern Europe. Snow Country asked all forces to withdraw from Eastern Europe within 3 days. Otherwise, there would be a real war. The Polar Bear Army, which had been silent for a long time, reappeared in front of the world. And these two forces, which dominated the world, now had a new leader. Fregalus, the chief marshal of Snow Country's military headquarters. Many people in the Dark World had never heard of this name, but probably no one would be unfamiliar with his code name in the Dark World. The leader of the Polar Ground Alliance. Tyrant. Late at night that day, Tyrant, who had been missing for a long time, reappeared in the palace of Snow Country. He took the leader of the president and rolled up the vanguard in the capital of Snow Country. He went straight to Mormons. The headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance was there. The news was passed on quickly. On this night that was destined to be unusual, many things were brewing quickly and finally taking shape. The whole of Eastern Europe began to take action in the chaos like never before. All the countries, all the high-level officials, all the wealthy families. Everyone was moving. Different positions, different demands, and different expectations directly erupted into a huge collision after a short period of brewing. The aftermath of the collision began to spread throughout Eastern Europe. President Jia Delin of Snow Country had convened several heads of state for a conference call. In Reki City, many patriarchs of wealthy families were nervously waiting for Li Tianlan's final reply. The grand banquet had begun. The agreement that had just been signed was sent back to Yuzhou as soon as possible under the cover of the army. The plane passed through the clouds. Under the clear sky, Wang Xianxia, who was holding the sword box, became more and more calm and indifferent. In the hotel in Reki City, Li Huaqing received a call and directly threw the cup in his hand in anger. In the hospital, Sidu Zhongyue was restless. In the ward next door, Qin Dongchao was talking with his younger brother Qin Shilai about the past. Raphael, the leader of the Dark Knights, was still in a coma, but he gradually showed signs of waking up. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Li Shi walked through the streets and alleys of Im and continued to move forward. The bus ran in the dark, and Mormons was getting closer and closer. Wang Tianzong began to practice calligraphy again. The vehicle cut through the wind and rain in the dark. Tribulation held the steering wheel tightly. The engine was roaring wildly, and his eyes were completely dead. There was silence in the square. Tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps were imprisoned in the square like statues. The elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital began to gather toward the castle where deity was. In the church, Arcis, the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, looked at Holy Virgin Angel, who was tied to the cross and covered in blood, and was roaring hysterically. Angel's face was numb. Several burly saint warriors pounced on her with a grim smile and tore apart her long dress. Angel, who had been disheartened for a long time, began to struggle desperately. With a scream, a thick steel needle directly pierced her delicate wrist and nailed her arm to the cross. The white dress was torn to pieces and kept flying. All the beauty began to be torn apart in the final madness, broken, and finally desperate. Lin Fengting redetermined the movements of some of the elites of the Lin clan in the manor. In the manor with birds singing and flowers fragrant, the dense fog had begun to rise uncontrollably. The door of the hall of the castle was closed. Deity, dressed in a wide robe, took off his shoes, stood on the ground, and began to meditate. In Lin and City, Li Honghe stood on the mountain, looking in the direction of Eastern Europe, and was muttering to himself. At the junction of Snow Country and Jiang Shangyu, who had disappeared, was holding a bottle of wine, looking out of the window at the wind and rain, and smiling carefreely. At the airport of Huding, Wang Yuetong had already boarded the plane with the members of the East Emperor Palace. All over the world. Beautiful, cruel, urgent, cold, proud, and desperate. This era, the next era, the young and the older generation. Everyone and everything began to converge crazily. Outside Reki City, in the continuous rain, a black vehicle drove over. The master of Samsara Palace put on a black mask and a black cloak. Flaming fire stood beside the master of Samsara Palace and looked at Li Tianlan. Her eyes trembled violently. Qin Weibai took Li Tianlan's hand and said softly, "I'm leaving. Remember what you promised me. You will take me to Tianan." Li Tianlan nodded with a smile and touched her hair. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace and said solemnly, "Stay alive." The master of Samsara Palace did not speak, just looked at him quietly. Her eyes were deep and calm, so deep that they seemed to be able to accommodate all emotions. From now on, she spoke slowly, her voice difficult and hoarse. But as she spoke, her voice became smooth, steady, and a little cold. "Be careful." Li Tianlan did not answer, but repeated again, "Stay alive." The master of Samsara Palace waved her hand, turned around, and walked into the black car. Qin Weibai put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck and kissed him. Then she got into the car. Flaming Fire stood by the car and looked at Li Tianlan for a long time before she slowly turned around. The black car started. The wind and rain scattered between heaven and earth. The car lights were getting farther and farther away, and finally became extremely faint. Li Tianlan watched quietly, and for a moment he seemed to be at a loss. In the moving car, Flaming Fire looked at the master of Samsara Palace through the rearview mirror with a complicated look in her eyes. In the wind and rain that they had been walking for a long time, the master of Samsara Palace suddenly said, "Stop the car." There was a flash of light in Flaming Fire's eyes, and she stepped on the brake immediately. The master of Samsara Palace opened the door and looked at the road. The world was filled with wind, rain, and darkness. The road was far away. Vaguely, in a trance, there seemed to be a person standing in the wind and rain, motionless. The master of Samsara Palace took a step forward subconsciously. Her foot fell, and she finally froze on the spot. At this moment, in the night, he stood far away from her, and she stood far away from him. The distance was not very far. Separated by darkness and wind and rain, it was as far as a natural moat. The master of Samsara Palace stood there, looking at the night deeply. She still had a lot to say, but she couldn't say a word. Under the night, the two people stood far away from each other, looking at each other. Like joy, like sadness. Like thinking, like forgetting. At this moment, no one knew what she was thinking. Time seemed to have passed in a moment, but also like thousands of years. The master of Samsara Palace moved her body, turned around, and walked back into the car. "Let's go," she said slowly and closed her eyes. There seemed to be liquid sliding down her face, and it was extremely cold through the metal mask. Flaming Fire drove without saying a word. But at some point she bit her lip hard, and her eyes were red from crying. "This fool," she cursed with a sobbing voice. The master of Samsara Palace smiled, and she seemed to be a little tired. She reached out and held Qin Weibai's palm, saying softly, "Everything in the world is the hardest to be yourself." Qin Weibai bit her lip and nodded, and her eyes were slightly red. The master of Samsara Palace looked ahead and didn't look back. Mormons was thousands of miles away from her sight. That was the end of everything. Her end. The wind and rain were howling. She leaned against the seat, and with an unparalleled weight, she was getting closer and closer to the end. It was coming to an end. There must be an end. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 570. The sky was getting darker and darker. The polar ice wind in Mormons, which was colder than that in Reki City, blew into the church, but it did not wake up the people in the church. The fanatical atmosphere full of desire was getting higher and higher. Some crazy gasps and low roars became the only melody in the church. The solid wooden cross had been completely dyed red with blood. The white dress, which represented transcendental holiness, had been completely torn apart. The blood-stained cloth was scattered around the cross, and the blood was dripping. On the cross, the woman whose limbs had been pierced by steel nails looked pale and numb. Countless disgusting liquids covered her body. She was naked. Her once white and tender body was so beautiful that no one dared to look at it directly. Bruises were everywhere on her body. Her once noble holiness was destroyed and shattered, and the final outcome was so desperate and cruel. The woman's eyes turned slightly and she looked at Arcis, who had been standing in the hall. The tall Arcis looked at her coldly. His eyes were cold, resentful, and happy. Another group of saint warriors hurriedly took off their clothes and rushed up. Their crazy voices, which were almost irrational, sounded. The whole hall had become the best place to vent their animal desires. No one could describe this feeling. It was absurd and comfortable to the bone. After all, at this moment, the person who was being wantonly insulted and played with under their bodies was the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. Just thinking about this kind of feeling was enough to make these saint warriors, who had firm beliefs, lose their minds. Groups of saint warriors went up and came down, over and over again. The cross had been completely dyed red with blood. Angel's body was nailed to it and she suffered countless ravages. Her expression did not change, and she just looked at Arsis quietly. There was no emotion in her eyes, only numbness and dullness. It was the despair of her entire soul being completely destroyed. The disgusting liquid flowed down with the blood. The strange smell in the hall was almost unbearable. Arsis took 2 steps forward and came to Angel. "Do you regret it?" He looked into her eyes. This is what you deserve. You betrayed the Vatican and your own faith. You will fall into hell and accompany the devil. Are you satisfied with such an ending? A glimmer of light gradually appeared in Angel's eyes. For her, it was like being cut into pieces by 1,000 knives. Her voice rang out in the slightly dark hall, and she enunciated clearly. "I have brought this upon myself, but what about you? What's the difference between your actions and the devil's?" She spoke in Chinese. As the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, she had been thinking about speaking Chinese and Mandarin for many years. Arisis's eyes suddenly flashed with rage. "Pa!" He slapped Angel hard in the face. Blood flowed down from the corner of his mouth, and Arisis's face was ferocious. "Speak human language, you bitch. You will go to hell." Angel laughed bitterly. "Everything I do is for the benefit of the Vatican. Maybe I have selfish motives, but I have always been clear about my position. Arsis, you have fallen. You are not worthy of the title of Saint War Angel." "Not worthy?" Arsis suddenly reached out and grabbed Angel's chin. He roared somewhat crazily, "You say I am not worthy? What about you? While you were being played with by that filthy, lowly assassin, have you ever thought that you are the Holy Virgin of the Vatican? In the 1,000-year history of the Vatican, you are the lowliest Holy Virgin. You are simply a disgrace to the Vatican. I heard that you have that heretic's child? Huh? Do you like men very much? How about now? You now have dozens of men who have slept with you. Do you feel good?" He slapped Angel's face hard and said coldly, "I am not an angel, but you are not a holy virgin either. You are just a lowly whore." "I love him." Angel's voice was weak. "But I have never given up my own position. Arsis, what do people like you know?" Arsis really did not understand. Because Angel was too weak and her voice was soft, he did not even understand the meaning of Angel's words. This damn woman, until now, was still speaking Chinese, which he was not very familiar with. "I have informed him," Arsis said coldly. "If he cares about you, he will come here. So you are very lucky. Before he appears, you will not die. During this period, you will still have many men. Enjoy it. Your Highness Holy Virgin, I will catch him and crucify him with you on the cross. You should all be purified." Angel's body moved. Just as she was about to speak, a sigh suddenly sounded. This sigh with incomparably complex emotions was deep and old. For a moment, it seemed to pull everyone's soul into it. Everyone, including Arsis, froze on the spot for a moment, with confused eyes. In the hall that exuded a subtle stench, the Pope in white walked in. "Are you from the North Island?" "I am from the Northeast." "Northeast?" "Northeast of Zhongzhou State." "I haven't been to Zhongzhou State yet. My name is Ariel from Italos. My name is Situ. This is my surname. Goodbye." "What a coincidence. Haven't you left yet?" Do you also like cherry blossoms?" "Then what are you looking at?" "Looking at the sea. The sea in the North Island is not beautiful. The other side of the sea is beautiful." "Oh, I don't like it there. I don't like that mountain. People in Italos don't like that mountain. I don't like it very much either. I've been very happy these days. See you tomorrow." "I'm leaving." "Where are you going?" "Oh, Zhongzhou State? I don't seem to be very welcome there. But I think I will go there. But Chinese is very difficult. Can you teach me?" "I'm leaving." "You can take me with you. I'll learn Chinese from you." "I can't." "Goodbye." Under the setting sun, the sunlight of the North Island shone from the sea level and fell on the cherry tree. The pure and beautiful woman watched his back gradually go away and suddenly said, "Actually, my name is Angel." The figure paused. "My name is Situ Wanjia." "Oh, Situ, we are friends." "They want to kill me. But my identity can represent a lot of things. They want my identity." Again. "Look at the cherry blossoms, your favorite." The petals of the cherry blossoms fluttered in the wind. In the morning after the rain, the world was full of clear light. She sat under the tree, looking a little haggard, with a breathtaking beauty. "After a long time," she said softly, "but I want to go back." The silent and sharp young man looked at the sea in the north. "After a long time," he said faintly, "then go back. I'll take you." "Oh, Holy Virgin?" "Sorry, you don't have to say sorry." The Holy Land was in front of them. From the North Island to the Holy Land, across mountains and rivers, across the plains, and over the sea, countless warriors with firm faith fell. After nearly half a year of traveling and wandering several times, the young man and woman finally arrived at Italos and the Holy Land. The man looked extremely tired, but the light in his eyes became sharper and sharper. "You are the missing Holy Virgin of the Vatican." "Sorry, the woman's voice trembled. The man turned around slowly and said calmly, "Goodbye." "That's the Holy Land where I grew up. I am the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. It has always been my dream to return. I have no choice. I can understand that the Holy Land has arrived. I should go." "Your Highness, Angel." "Don't call me Your Highness. Call me by my name." In the cold silence, the woman, who could reach the peak with only one step forward, looked back at the Holy Land, her eyes in a trance. "I have always wanted to come back because my dream is here." But at this time, the dream was so illusory. Only the man in front of her, who had stood in front of her countless times in the past 6 months, was so real. She returned to the Holy Land. "But now, I want to leave here. Situ, take me away, okay?" "Your Majesty, let him go, please." "Your Highness, Angel, don't forget your identity. He is my friend, Arsis. You are not qualified to interfere with my privacy." "Ridiculous. The Holy Virgin has no privacy. I don't want to be the Holy Virgin. I don't want. If you don't be the Holy Virgin, he will die." "This is blasphemy. Purify this heretic. He kidnapped the Holy Virgin. He deserves to die." No, I beg you, let him go." The engine roared to the limit in the wind and rain. The night retreated rapidly, and the vehicle went straight from the road to the highway. At the maximum speed, the off-road vehicle with the pass of the Snowdance Corps directly passed through the border of Wulan State. Tribulation's eyes became more and more silent. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the vehicle officially entered the border of Im. The engine roared, which was almost overloaded, continued. The vehicle rushed in the wind and rain, and countless memories flashed through his mind. "Greetings, Your Highness, you are?" "I'm Situ Tsangyue's younger brother." "Younger brother? I'm Tribulation." "Oh, the little guy back then, I've seen you. Why are you here?" "I want to become stronger." The calm voice was with unimaginable stubbornness and paranoia, like the growl of an injured beast. "There are many ways to become stronger. But it's only with you that I can find the fastest and most effective method. My martial arts are very special." "Why do you want to become stronger?" "I just want to bring her back. He said she wanted to go with me. He said she wanted to see the cherry blossoms in the North Island." "Where is she?" The other party didn't ask who she was, just where she was. In the old man's mind, it didn't matter who the other party was at all. The Holy Land. The 3 simple words seemed to carry great weight. He slowly opened his mouth and said it with great difficulty. "The Holy Land. You want to take away their Holy Virgin? Or a candidate for the Holy Virgin? Or a certain core god's punishment priest?" "No matter who it is, in my current state, if I go all out to face Arsis and the Pope in the Holy Land, I should have a 70% chance to bring her back. But if it's you, I'm afraid it will take many years. Your Highness is willing to help me." I can't take action. Otherwise, what will happen to the remaining soldiers behind me? I heard that your highness has the map of God of War in your hand, which can be the fastest. That's the invincible manual. You may die. I've already died once. When I was in the Holy Land, please help me, your highness. I can give you the invincible manual. What can you give me? As long as I have it, I'm willing to give everything. 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 I don't want everything from you, but I want your position. There has been a rumor in the world that your highness had set up many backups before the collapse of the Li family. Among them, the 7 stars should be the leader. If the rumor is true, Tribulation is willing to be one of the 7 stars. The 7 stars already have a candidate. You don't need to worry. If you want, from today on, your code name in the Li family is Arctic. What am I going to do? In a few years, if there is a suitable opportunity, I hope you can take care of my grandson outside. The old man pointed forward. Through the dense forest, in the farthest distance of sight, a child stood there vaguely. He held a sword in one hand. Under the scorching sun, he was as still as a sculpture. This is my grandson, Li Dunlun. Tribulation's eyes fell on the phone. Countless pictures in his memory surged like a tide. They were broken, messy, clear, and vague. He picked up the phone and found Li Tianlan's phone number. He hesitated for a moment and finally did not dial. In the early morning of August 25th, the black off-road vehicle rushed across the border of Im and continued to move forward. All the way north. The cold current of the Arctic Ocean was whistling in the wind and rain. The darkness ahead was getting deeper and deeper. The vehicle entered snow country and moved forward all the way. It was already a polar night in the northern area of snow country. The wind and rain were like a waterfall, constantly sprinkling between heaven and earth. Tribulation's eyes became more and more focused. The serious injury in his body began to be suppressed little by little, at all costs. He no longer thought about what would happen in the future. At this moment, Tribulation was shuttling wildly in the shadow, with only concentration in his mind. This was the strongest tribulation. He no longer thought about the future tribulation. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the black off-road vehicle entered the northernmost part of snow country, less than 100 kilometers away from Mormons. Tribulation suddenly felt a little regretful. In this world of ice and snow, there were no cherry blossoms, her favorite. Even he was not the same as before. And like this, he also failed to fulfill his promise to the old man. He finally picked up the mobile phone and dialed the number. The phone was slowly connected in a short silence. A soft but somewhat surprised voice sounded on the other end of the phone. Can you still make phone calls? Sister, Tribulation was silent for a moment and whispered, do me a favor. Xianxia seemed to be a little stunned and did not speak for a while. From now on, help me take care of Tianlan. This is my promise to the Li family. Where are you? There seemed to be something cold connecting the two ends of the phone in an instant. Xianxia's voice became extremely calm in an instant. Tribulation held the phone and drove faster and faster. He shook his head and whispered, Sister, I'm sorry. The phone was hung up. In the crazy roar of the engine, Tribulation, who was full of regret and concentration, threw away the phone and the mask on his face. The face, which was no longer young, faced the wind and rain outside the window and rushed directly to Mormons in the most decisive manner. Without hesitation. Chapter 571. In the dim light, Angel's eyes moved with effort. Her gaze fell on the Pope's face. The Pope's face was as gentle as ever, and his eyes were filled with sighs and pity. Angel's body moved, and the steel nails in her limbs felt a sharp pain. Her somewhat blurred consciousness woke up in the pain. Your Majesty the Pope. Her voice was hoarse and weak. Do you regret it, Angel? The Pope asked slowly, and the pity in his eyes grew deeper and deeper. I want to regret. What do I regret? Angel asked softly. The Pope did not speak. Angel's breathing was a little short, and she said with difficulty, I just don't understand what I did wrong. We got nothing in Eastern Europe, and it was all because of you. Angel, you betrayed the Vatican. The Pope's tone was still calm. That's not betrayal. I just did what I thought was right. Plus, he can't kill Paul. Your Majesty, whether the Vatican is willing to admit it or not, it's a fact. With our strength, we can't afford to offend Zhongzhou state. The Pope looked at her without saying a word. Now it's too late. Angel murmured to herself. No one can control everything. The Pope tidied up his white robe and said blandly, I can understand your feelings when you destroyed Arisus's coronation, and I can also understand your thoughts at that time. But in fact, everything that happened after you destroyed his coronation was beyond your expectations. Arsis was hypnotized and used the redemption in advance. In the battle known as the Trial Day, the Vatican had almost no effect. Paul and King Tong did not die, and we had no interests in Eastern Europe. In this chaos, we suffered a crushing defeat. If Arsis was at his peak, it might have been another result now. I understand your original intention, but the reality is that all this is because you destroyed his coronation. That's not my intention. Angel was silent for a moment, then sighed and said, I overestimated Arsis. The Pope's eyes flashed with a touch of humor and bitterness in an instant. He shook his head and did not speak. Angel had indeed overestimated Arsis. As one of the few experts at the peak of the invincible realm in the Dark World, compared with the others, Arisus's aptitude was not very outstanding. He had exhausted all his potential to barely break through to the peak of the invincible realm. It could even be said that he had overdrawn all his potential. He was known as the best in close combat in the Dark World, but his willpower was always a little weak, which was also his recognized weakness. But before that, except for the Pope, no one had thought that Arisus's will would be so fragile. According to Angel's estimation, even if she destroyed the coronation, the other party's will should be far beyond that of an ordinary invincible realm expert. At most, it should be a little worse than that of a peak invincible realm expert. Except for the Pope, who could hypnotize such a person. However, after Arisus's coronation was destroyed, he directly stepped into the hypnosis trap of the Eastern Church. As a result, the strength of Arisus's will was clearly exposed in front of everyone. Without being crowned, Arisus's comprehensive combat capability was at the peak of the invincible realm in his normal state. But in terms of willpower alone, he was at most a little stronger than an ordinary invincible realm expert, and his strength was limited. This was the Saint War Angel who supported the Vatican. His willpower was not even as strong as when he died in East Island more than 3 or 4 years ago. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Aldak, the Angel of Slaughter, was in Li Tianlan's hands. Even in the current situation, Angel felt that this was a little ridiculous. She shook her head and said with a mocking look in her eyes, in fact, this is your main purpose for targeting me, isn't it? The fundamental reason why I paid the price today is not because of the series of consequences caused by me destroying the coronation. Your Majesty, the fundamental reason why you are so indifferent and Arsis is so crazy is that I destroyed his coronation. This matter itself has nothing to do with the consequences. The Pope was silent. Angel was right. Destroying Arisus's coronation itself was the biggest loss of the Vatican this time. It was so heavy that even the Pope was a little crazy. Although the Vatican gained nothing in Eastern Europe this time, it did not lose too much. It was nothing more than some elite saint warriors. Although it was distressing to lose these losses, as the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, Angel could not be treated like this. The reason why she ended up like this now was that she had overestimated Arsis. She had never thought that Arisus's will was so fragile. After destroying the coronation and being hypnotized, the will of the Pope's coronation on him would constantly backfire on Arsis. Under normal circumstances, as long as Arisus's will was firm, there would be no problem, but his will was not up to standard at all. In this way, the most intuitive consequence was that Arsis, who had lost the Pope's coronation, would have a sharp decline in his combat capability. The decline of his will also meant that Arsis was about to fall from the peak of the invincible realm. Even if he was crowned again in the future, he would no longer have the strength in his normal state. In the Battle of Eastern Europe, the Vatican had directly lost an expert at the peak of the invincible realm. That was why Aristus's performance was getting more and more abnormal. His resentment against Angel was increasing every moment. He wanted to retaliate against her and all the people related to her in the cruelest way. And the Pope chose to acquiesce in this situation. Our sis informed tribulation of your news. The Pope changed the topic and suddenly asked, Angel, do you think he will come? Angel looked at the Pope quietly. There was no panic in her eyes. Instead, there was a very gentle smile. He will definitely come. She stubbornly held on, letting Arsis torture her body and tear her soul, just to see him again. Just one look. He will die. The Pope looked at Angel, and he suddenly felt a little uneasy. Angel gave a faint, oh. The Pope took a deep breath and said blandly, you were right about what you said just now. You destroyed Aristus's coronation and made the Vatican suffer a huge loss that it had not suffered for many years, so you will end up like this. But there is one more thing, Angel, I don't like you. The Holy Virgin of the Vatican must maintain a perfect and pure virgin body. For so many years, your existence has always been a shame to me and to the Vatican. Angel laughed. Her laugh was extremely weak, but it was full of sarcasm. You don't like me? I'm the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. For so many years, I think everything I do is worthy of the Vatican. Even this time, my original intention is not. I understand. The Pope nodded and interrupted her. I understand too, but I just don't like you. Hating a person would not be shaken by how many good things she had done. He just didn't like her, and that was enough. Angel was silent for a while and said slowly, I understand. Actually, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page. In the dark environment, her voice was ethereal and demonic, with a strong sense of depravity. I wanted to say for a long time that I don't like you, Pope, and I don't like the Vatican even more. It's only because the Vatican has my faith that I chose to stay. For the sake of faith, I gave up a lot of things. But until today, until now, I understand that what I insist on is not that I can't give up, but those who have given up a long time ago really can't give up. She leaned against the cross and looked at the Pope. Her body was covered in blood, but her expression was so solemn, as if they were meeting like this. Let me introduce myself. I'm Angel Situ. Arsis, who was next to her, gradually woke up in the Pope's spiritual domain. He heard Angel's self-introduction and her following voice. From today onwards, I am a non-believer. Aristus's face suddenly twisted, and his furious roar echoed wildly in the church. The Pope's face was a little gloomy. Non-believers, after all, fall into hell. Angel chuckled. Is hell very scary? I'm in the church now, under the gaze of the Father, but in my heart, this is hell. This is arrogance. Enough! Angel suddenly interrupted Aristus's roar. She seemed to have a terminal lucidity. Her spirit was getting better, and her eyes gradually became clear and disdainful. Who do you think you are? You're a clown hiding behind the old Pope. Do you really think you're a saint, War Angel? Aristus's eyes were red, and even his hair was standing on end. All right. The Pope's light voice sounded. Angel, you've seen your end. It doesn't make sense to say anything now. He slowly turned around, walked back to the way he came, and said calmly, I said that no one can control everything. The reason why the chaos is that it is changing at any time. The general trend is changing, and so are the enemies and ourselves. We did lose the opportunity to cooperate with Li Tianlan. This is a loss in your eyes, but you don't know that after we lost Li Tianlan, we have established a cooperative relationship with the Wang family of Beihai. So in the future, Eastern Europe will still be the world of the Vatican. His figure walked to the door and paused. Ars, he ordered in a faint and emotionless tone, destroy her. Arsis grinned hideously. Angel's body suddenly began to struggle. The sharp steel nails rubbed against her flesh, and the severe pain made her more awake. You can't destroy me. You can't do it. I can die, but I have what this clown lacks the most. Pope, you can't destroy my will. Smith. Arsis slapped Angel hard in the face. Angel no longer struggled. She suddenly laughed in a low voice. Some strange laughter echoed in the dark light. Her eyes were extremely still, like an abyss of eternal darkness. A chill gradually rose in Erisis's heart. "You're all wrong," Angel said quietly. "Even if you unite with the Wang family of Beihai, so what? Eastern Europe will never be the world of the Vatican, and it will never be the world of the Vatican." The Pope, who was ready to leave, turned around and looked at Angel. Angel looked into his eyes, as if to see into his heart. "Do you know Protestantism?" End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 572. It was windy and rainy. The smooth road looked extremely pale under the bright headlights. The messy heavy rain spread from the front to the far end of the site. The whole sky seemed to become chaotic with the wind and rain. In the silent car, the three women who seemed to have calmed down again were silent. Flaming Fire held the steering wheel and said nothing. Under the cold mask and black cloak, the master of Samsara Palace leaned against the seat motionlessly, as if she was asleep. There was a dim light beside the master of Samsara Palace. Qin Weibai held the notebook and read the emails carefully. Her expression was as beautiful as an oil painting. Her fingers flew lightly on the keyboard, and she handled one thing after another skillfully. The chaos was coming. The well-prepared Samsara Palace had begun to reveal its trump cards one by one. The Samsara Palace, which had been hiding in the dark, began to take action. For the Samsara Palace, the chaos that had been planned for a long time was still chaotic, but as long as the general direction was still under its control, it was acceptable. This was the power that began to be gradually exerted after the merger of more than one force. It was specific to each department of the Samsara Palace, each family, and each important figure. Everyone was moving. The notebook in front of Qin Weibai recorded everyone's specific movements and messages. Some of the messages were completely one-way. After receiving the messages, even Qin Weibai could not confirm where the messages came from for a while. She sorted out each message and then passed it to everyone in the fastest way. The cold wind whistled, the rain beat on the car window, and the sound of slender fingers tapping on the keyboard gathered together. It was like the sound of chess pieces being placed. The whole of Eastern Europe was a chessboard. This game of chess had been planned for too long. It was no exaggeration to say that since the establishment of the Samsara Palace, everything had been prepared for this moment. A large number of spies, innumerable insiders, and lurking undercover agents, both on the surface and in the dark, involved in various industries and fields. Countless spies began to gather together with the dense news. No one could control everything. But under the circumstances that conditions permitted, the Samsara Palace had done everything to the extreme. In this round, the Samsara Palace didn't want to win for sure, but to not lose. The Samsara Palace was not a superpower in the dark world. Although they were strong, they had no foundation, and the lack of foundation made people unable to see their future. They were not as deep-rooted as the Wang family of Beihai, the Vatican, and even the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But it had only been a few months since the chaos in Eastern Europe broke out. No matter how steady the arrangements of the major forces were, there would always be some haste amidst the calm. But the Samsara Palace was different. In the land of Eastern Europe, they had been laying out for several years. All the preparations could not be more complete. In the last time, what Qin Weibai had to do was to use the information in her hands to fix the chess pieces one by one in the final position. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. In this way, as long as the chessboard did not flip, this game would be unbreakable. A new email appeared on the computer screen. Qin Weibai glanced at it and fell silent. She stopped typing on the keyboard. After a long time, she said slowly, "Tribulation is close to Mormons." The car was moving forward, passing through the wind and rain, neither fast nor slow. The master of Samsara Palace, who had been silent, suddenly moved and whispered, "The Vatican is finished." Qin Weibai waited in silence. But she waited for a long time, and the master of Samsara Palace did not speak. "That's it?" She couldn't help asking. "That's it?" The master of Samsara Palace nodded. "What will happen to tribulation?" Qin Weibai asked directly. She had known her for many years, but until now, she could not accept her indifference. This kind of coldness, cruelty, or even inhumanity completely stripped away all emotions. When a person was in such a state, the world was incomparably pure, so pure that it could only accommodate one person's figure. Apart from that, beautiful, cruel, sad, inspiring hers, his, it, and even herself, everything had nothing to do with her. The only meaning of such a life seemed to be to remember and wait. To recall the past and wait for the end. Qin Weibai did not dislike such a character. She just felt distressed. No one's life should be like this. What kind of life was this? The master of Samsara Palace fell silent. She seemed to be thinking, but it also seemed that she did not hear Qin Weibai's words. Qin Weibai suddenly felt a little powerless. Tribulation was close to Mormons. In the intelligence of the Samsara Palace, Holy Virgin Angel had been regarded as a traitor by the Vatican. It was not hard to imagine what would happen to Tribulation after he left. But there was only one result for the master of Samsara Palace. The Vatican was finished. What would happen to Tribulation? She did not seem to care about this question at all. If she did not care, how could she plan? He will not die. The master of Samsara Palace's voice was like a sigh, with extremely complicated emotions. Qin Weibai once again turned a piece of intelligence into an order and sent it down. She looked at the screen, thought for a while, and said, "I'm not sure." The Samsara Palace's control of Mormons had really reached the extreme. The pervasive penetration over the years could almost be said to be really everywhere. In that small city close to the Polar Ground and the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance, nothing could be hidden from the Samsara Palace. The Samsara Palace received the news as soon as the Vatican took Angel into Mormons. But at that time, all the arrangements of the Samsara Palace had begun. The master of Samsara Palace had also left Mormons. The elites of the Lin clan were still gathering. Only Lin Fengting was in Mormons. But Lin Fengting was also the most important person in the final battle. The Samsara Palace could not let him be alone. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He was going to face the Pope, Arcis, and many of the most elite saint warriors. Most importantly, according to the Samsara Palace's prediction, although Angel was in danger, it was not impossible to turn the situation around. However, the only thing that was out of the Samsara Palace's expectation was that the Vatican was too lenient and cruel to the traitors. They tried to wash away the shame with purification for the traitor Holy Virgin. But in the face of the deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps, who also betrayed the Vatican, they were too lenient. Mellad betrayed the Vatican, but he also established cooperation with the Vatican. The Pope was too decisive in this matter. He did not even hesitate at all. He was so fast that the Samsara Palace could not operate anything at all. In this way, not only Angel, but also the possibility of Tribulation surviving was infinitely reduced. Qin Weibai subconsciously glanced at Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire drove quietly at a moderate speed. She shook her head and said, "It's too late." "Is that the only way?" Qin Weibai looked out of the window and muttered to herself. "That's the best." The master of Samsara Palace said indifferently, "After the trial day, the Vatican failed to plot against the 5 countries in Eastern Europe and has begun to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai. There is little information in this regard. We can't determine to what extent their cooperation with the Wang family of Beihai has reached. But in the final battle, they will not be our friends. In this case, it is better to let them withdraw in advance." "Is this an exchange?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked. The master of Samsara Palace was silent for a while and said faintly, "It's worth it." In her eyes, there was no such concept as whether it was cruel or not, only whether it was worth it or not. Qin Weibai looked at the master of Samsara Palace quietly for a long time. "I can understand your thoughts," she said slowly and softly, "but have you ever thought about what Tianlan will do if he knows that Tribulation has gone to Mormons?" "I'm mentally prepared." The master of Samsara Palace's voice was dull. "If he appears on the battlefield, I'll come." She paused and continued, "And he may not necessarily go. The Snowdance Corps will not play a role in this final battle." Qin Weibai thought of the news that came not long ago. The Snowdance Corps, which was gathered in the parade square of Reki City, was defeated by Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong. While the banquet in Reki City was still going on, President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State and commander of the Snowdance Corps, Li Tianlan, had already rushed to the office of the president. Qin Weibai frowned. Can't Li Huaqing persuade Wang Tianzong? Have you ever seen a real chosen one? The master of Samsara Palace suddenly asked. Qin Weibai was stunned and shook her head subconsciously. The master of Samsara Palace turned to look in the direction of Reki City and muttered to herself, "He's coming soon." She looked through the window. Outside the window, there was only heavy rain. The rain was like black ink, covering the sky. It was so cold and so desperate. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 573. Only by witnessing it with his own eyes could he understand how shocking the sword move of the strongest swordsman in the world was. The military parade square of Reki City was extremely wide. Within a radius of thousands of meters, the dense broken raindrops, which were like crystal grains, were quietly and strangely suspended in the air. The sword intent extended from the broken raindrops, stretching the crystals one by one. The lights in the square refracted colorful light in the suspended crystal grains. The whole square became hazy and blurred. The soldiers of the Snowdance Corps froze there one after another, looking like dead things. The military parade square had been completely cordoned off. The military of Wulan State blocked the 2 blocks around the square. On the steps around the square, in front of a blurred and dangerous light, Li Tianlan quietly looked at a soldier of the Snowdance Corps who was closest to him. The halo was spreading, the raindrops were breaking, the sword energy was extending, and the danger was spreading. In his sight, the soldier of the Snowdance Corps was very close to him, but everything in front of him became extremely blurred. Vaguely, Li Tianlan could see that the other party's eyes were trying to move. Obviously, this sword move imprisoned his body, but it could not imprison his mind. Li Tianlan's palm moved, and then he fell silent again. "How is it?" Li Huaqing stood beside Li Tianlan and asked in a gloomy tone. His expression was solemn, but his eyes were extremely cold. When he received the news here, Li Huaqing was still immersed in the joy of signing the contract with Wulan State. As a result, tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps were imprisoned by a sword move, and it was the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State who did it. How could such news be blocked? Now, perhaps the whole world knew that the Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong had attacked the Snowdance Corps. Such behavior was tantamount to openly stepping on Li Huaqing's bottom line. No matter how he looked at it, Wang Tianzong had gone too far. Chi-Chi's first appearance, Li Tianlan shook his head and said calmly, "There's no way." In Eastern Europe, there were few times when he was powerless. But in the face of Wang Tianzong's sword move, he really had no way at all. His sword intent was perfect, but he didn't have enough sword energy to support it. Even if there was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm who practiced the same martial arts as him and was willing to lend him his sword energy, Li Tianlan couldn't break this sword. The Wang Tianzong who wielded this sword was completely different from the Wang Tianzong on the night of the trial day. It could almost be said to be at another level. Now that this sword was here, unless Wang Tianzong wanted to withdraw the sword energy or wait for the sword energy to disappear by itself, no one in the entire dark world could do anything to this sword. Li Huaqing slowly turned around and looked at the light curtain flashing with different colors in front of him. The blurred figures of countless soldiers of the Snowdance Corps were constantly shaking in the light curtain. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but Li Huaqing could clearly feel their struggle in silence and stiffness. A surge of anger rushed to the top of his head. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and suddenly opened his mouth. His loud and clear voice directly rushed through the broken curtain of rain. "Wang Tianzong, come out." The broken curtain of rain trembled slightly. A drop of rain that had been stretched by the sword qi slowly fell. In the slight sound of footsteps, Wang Tianzong's figure seemed to come out of the rain. He looked at Li Huaqing and then at Li Tianlan without saying anything. Li Tianlan didn't say anything either. There was no Wang Tianzong in front of him. The The so-called image was just a stream of sword energy, but it was extremely real. Tianzong, what's going on? Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and his voice grew gloomier. They need to stay here for a few days. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm. He looked straight into Li Huaqing's eyes and didn't give in at all. What's the reason? There's no reason. Li Huaqing's eyes almost narrowed into a line. No reason? He nodded and suddenly became furious. If there's no reason, why do you imprison them here? Do you know that these are the most elite core of Zhongzhou State and also the core that have made great contributions to Zhongzhou State? Wang Tianzong, what do you want to do? Beihai Province is still a province of Zhongzhou State. Have you considered their position when you do this? Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became cold. He nodded and said, I'm doing this because my position hasn't changed. Mr. President, you're right. They're the most elite core in Zhongzhou State. As a Zhongzhou citizen, I have the obligation to protect them. This is the last battle, and they shouldn't be sacrificed in vain in such a battle. I left them here for the survival of the entire Snowdance Corps. The last battle? Li Huaqing paused slightly and said in a low voice, What do you mean? Wang Tianzong didn't answer. He glanced at Li Tianlan calmly and said meaningfully, Tribulation went to Mormons. Li Tianlan's face suddenly changed. At the same time, his cell phone suddenly rang. Li Tianlan took out his cell phone. It was Situ Tsangyue's phone number. Pale lightning flashed across the night sky of Reki City. Li Tianlan answered the phone. In the messy wind and rain, in the rainy season of Eastern Europe, an unprecedented thunder suddenly shook between heaven and earth. In the lightning and thunder, Li Tianlan, who was holding the phone, turned livid in an instant. The thunder gradually passed. The heavy rain poured down. When the rainy season was about to end, an incomparably wild heavy rain swept through all of Eastern Europe. Lightning raged in the air. Li Tianlan silently put down the phone. The image of Wang Tianzong condensed by the sword energy had disappeared. Li Tianlan looked in the direction of Wang Tianzong across the square and was silent for a long time. In the room with the lights on, Wang Tianzong, who was dressed in a wide robe with big sleeves of the Han costume, was also looking in Li Tianlan's direction with a writing brush in his hand. He watched Li Tianlan narrow his eyes, watch him remain silent, and watch him turn around and leave. Where are you going? Li Huaqing's voice sounded. Li Tianlan didn't look back and said calmly, Mormons? Wang Tianzong laughed. At this moment, he didn't know if Li Tianlan understood, but he had already understood. These were not his plans. At his current height, he no longer needed any plans. Li Tianlan was indeed tricky, but as long as he wanted to, he could solve it in the simplest way. When the Snowdance Corps was imprisoned here, in the vast Eastern Europe, Reki City, Wulan State, there was no young marshal. On the final battlefield, Li Tianlan was just Li Tianlan. That was all. Over the Manor of Mormons, the wind and rain suddenly became heavier. The polar night was getting darker. Inside and outside the manor, the hazy fog seemed to have broken free from its shackles and began to fill every corner. The white fog, which represented rich vitality, flowed slowly and lingered in every flower and leaf in the manor. It gathered and did not disperse, looking beautiful and mysterious. The deep black and white fog of the polar night slowly intertwined. Lin Fengting silently walked in the garden, carefully looking at the grass and trees in front of him. His movements were very slow, and his eyes were focused on every flower in his line of sight. Such a serious posture gave people the feeling that he wasn't looking at the flowers at all, but was looking for something. An old voice sounded behind him, and he was a little confused. What are you doing, sir? Behind Lin Fengting, the 13th Supermaster of Samsara Palace, Xianxia, the Metaphysics Grandmaster of Zhongzhou State with the code name Tianji, held an umbrella with a puzzled look in his eyes. He had used Immortal fate to connect Li Tianlan's dragon vein with Qin Weibai, and their vitality was closely connected. Now it was time to have a result, so he naturally had to come and see. But he did not know what Lin Fengting was looking for here at this time. Lin Fengting walked slowly, as if he did not hear Xianxuanzi's voice. Xianxuanzi hesitated for a moment and followed Lin Fengting with an umbrella, carefully observing the white fog condensed by fate around him. The frantic raindrops pattered on the pitch-black surface of the umbrella. The flowers and plants shook, the thunder roared, the lightning flashed, the wind howled, and the rain fell. It was noisy. In a trance, Lin Fengting's very soft and low voice sounded, with trance and unreality. Master, do you think there will be two flowers that are exactly the same in such a big garden? Xianxia was stunned for a moment. There would not be two leaves, two flowers, or two people that were exactly the same in the world. He glanced at Lin Fengting and said with a smile, maybe there will be similar ones. Lin Fengting's voice was a little persistent. I mean exactly the same. How is that possible? Xianxia smiled and shook his head. I thought it was impossible before, but why is it impossible? Lin Fengting muttered to himself and shook his head. Xianxia suddenly felt a little uneasy. His eyes focused and looked at Lin Fengting. What do you mean, sir? Boring. Lin Fengting shook his head. These, he pointed to the vast fog ahead. Such strong fate, such strong vitality, who did you give it to? To the boss, of course. Xianxuanzi's tone was indifferent. Lin Fengting laughed. His smile was complicated and absurd. Who is your boss? Xianxuanzi looked at him with even more absurd eyes. He asked, who else can it be except Qin Weibai? Lin Fengting whispered, who else can it be except Qin Weibai? In the wind and rain, he smiled bitterly. But the question is, who is Qin Weibai? In the dark church, in the almost frozen atmosphere, blood was still flowing. The smell of blood seemed to have a strange fragrance, and the smell that represented sin and desire had begun to fade away. The Pope, who was about to leave, walked back step by step. Angel looked at him, and her calm eyes were like ice and snow. What is the new stream? The Pope stared into Angel's eyes and asked seriously. You don't know the new stream? Angel tilted her head and looked at the Pope. Her voice was hoarse with strange emotions. The Pope said nothing. Of course, he knew the new stream. In the traditional sense, the new stream was also a sect that believed in God. In the eyes of ordinary people, there was no difference between the Vatican, the Eastern Church, and the new stream. But because of their different interpretations of the same faith, they were strangers to each other and even regarded each other as heretics. The Vatican was powerful. It was entrenched in Eastern Europe and spread all over the world. The Eastern Church was also deeply rooted in Eastern Europe. The new stream was a force that had only risen in recent years. It had no clear diocese, scattered personnel, and insufficient foundation. It was mainly distributed in Southeast Asia. This kind of sect without foundation was not worthy of the Vatican's attention. But the new stream really had a large number of people, and in the chaotic area of Southeast Asia, it was very easy to cultivate fanatics. So the new stream had developed very fast in recent years and had vaguely become the third force besides the Vatican and the Eastern Church. But at this moment, the Pope was not sure if the Protestantism that Angel was talking about was the Protestantism that she knew. You joined the new stream? The Pope's voice suddenly became extremely cold. I didn't join the new stream. Angel's voice became more and more difficult. I said that before today. I had a clear conscience about the Vatican. The Pope looked at Angel coldly and did not speak. I didn't join it, but it doesn't mean that I haven't been in contact with the new stream. I am the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. The new stream is developing very fast. I very much hope to absorb the new stream, let the new stream accept our ideas, and then become our new diocese. Did you see the Pope of the new stream? The Pope suddenly asked. Angel shook her head. I didn't see the Pope. She smiled. But I saw the Holy Virgin of the new stream, whose status is even higher than the Pope. She said quietly, but the Pope's body suddenly became extremely cold. It was raining heavily. The conversation between Angel and the Pope came to an end. The conversation between Mellad and the mysterious Majesty also came to an end. There was silence at the end. Listening to Angel's encounter, His Majesty did not speak for a long time. Mellad waited quietly. But the longer he waited, the more he felt that something was wrong. You mean that our sis arranged a lot of confidants for Angel? // To be exact, there are 16. Mellad said seriously. That is to say, Angel had 16 men overnight? His Majesty's voice was very cold. Then he sneered. Do you think it's possible? Mellad seriously thought about the situation at that time. From his standpoint, he really wanted to see such a hot scene where the saint warriors insulted the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. Therefore, he paid special attention to this matter. He carefully recalled and confirmed again, that's the truth. Bullshit. His Majesty suddenly scolded angrily. With Angel's character, purity is her bottom line. She only has tribulation in her heart. Tell me, under what circumstances would she let more than 10 men insult her? Mellad was silent for a while and tentatively said, when she can't resist. His Majesty was not amused by his dry humor. He thought slowly and said, it's impossible for Angel to have no room to resist. There's something wrong with this matter. It's impossible. His voice was silent for a while, and he suddenly asked, how many times has Angel been in contact with the Samsara Palace? As far as I know, there was only one time in the Holy Land. Mellad said, that night, I saw Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting. Angel was also there. His Majesty said, did Lin Fengting attack you that night? Mellad nodded. You were unscathed? His Majesty's voice became more and more gloomy. Mellad still nodded. Lin Fengting is just as a... Although his sword is strong, it's very slow. It's too slow. His Majesty's voice suddenly rose. It's so slow that you don't know how many things you've missed. He took a few rapid breaths and said coldly, didn't you notice the time after it was over? How long did it take for Lin Fengting to attack with that sword? 10 minutes? Or half an hour? Mellad opened his mouth, but his heart suddenly sank. He didn't know how long it took for Lin Fengting to attack with that sword that night. He didn't know if he had noticed the time. At this moment, he tried hard to recall, and suddenly found that he had no impression of the time that night at all. The wind and rain filled the sky. His Majesty hung up the phone. Under the gloomy polar night, the roar of the engine with a crazy meaning sounded faintly. The bright headlights rushed over like two raging tides and rushed straight to the church. The sky was full of killing. At the same time, the atmosphere in the church hall had completely frozen. The Pope regained his indifference. Angel, there was a sigh in his voice. Angel suddenly raised her head and looked at him. My name is Situ. She laughed softly. In an instant, all the Pope could see was Angel's figure. Her figure was so tall, so clear, and so beautiful that it almost occupied the whole world. The Pope was at a loss for a moment and suddenly woke up. This was an absolutely pure spiritual domain. This was the transcendent realm. The Pope suddenly retreated, and his voice became extremely high as he retreated. Kill her! The sound of a heavy object falling to the ground rang out without warning. Before Arsis came back to his senses, around him, one after another, the saint warriors who had once insulted Angel with a grim smile had fallen silently. The hall of the church was still extremely dark, but the light was changing slightly. In a trance, Angel, whose limbs were nailed to the cross, was bleeding. But the smell that was full of desire was moving away. Her body was no longer naked. The torn white dress reappeared on her body, extremely clean and tidy. Arisis's eyes widened in disbelief. Was everything just an illusion? How was it possible? Angel, who was wearing a white dress and bleeding, slowly opened her eyes. She looked at Arsis, and there was undisguised arrogance in her tone. I said that you are a clown, and I have the will and spirit that you lack the most. How dare you insult me? Arisis's huge body suddenly trembled. Extreme anger swallowed all his reason in an instant. The whole night, all the scenes, the cruel revenge, the desperate struggles and wailing, were all the scenes he had imagined. Now Angel's dress was neat and tidy. When the illusion disappeared, she was so arrogant. Arisis's fingers kept trembling. Angel glanced at Arsis coldly. Arisis's face was angry and resentful. In Angel's spiritual domain, he didn't feel anything strange, but Angel spat out a mouthful of blood directly. At the same time, the Pope's aura also quickly weakened. The Pope's figure began to retreat quickly in the darkness, but his order did not change. "Arcis, kill her." Angel laughed. Outside the church, the wild and galloping vehicle crashed into the church. In the polar night sky, there was a fire burning in the continuous heavy rain. Angel's body straightened up and she said calmly, "Everything you did tonight is blasphemy. You are guilty." Chapter 574. The Pope quickly stepped back. He had been standing on the altar all his life, controlling people's hearts, and his words were law. It could be said that he was extremely brilliant. But at this moment he felt an unprecedented danger. Danger. This was a feeling that the Pope had almost forgotten. From the above-board political circles of various countries to the dark and bloody dark world, he was ambitious, bold, invincible, and domineering. But he never felt that anyone could threaten him. He really didn't understand martial arts, not at all. But in the spiritual field, he was truly invincible, and no one could kill him. But at this moment, the omen of death was so clear. It was like a dark shadow was crazily spreading over. The surrounding space was collapsing and the earth was cracking. Stars were falling and light was disappearing. Deathly silence and coldness spread over with an almost eternal darkness, swallowing everything like an abyss. Countless scenes kept changing in front of him, and finally returned to reality. The reality was Angel's eyes, so beautiful that they occupied everything. The transcendent realm. At this moment, the Pope could finally be completely convinced that in his invincible spiritual field, there was now an opponent who could compete with him. The traitor of the Vatican, the Holy Virgin Angel, had also entered the transcendent realm. How was this possible? The Pope only felt that everything that had happened today was extremely absurd. Everything that Angel had experienced, all the insults, and the sinful desires, were all illusions. But when he was unprepared, even he was deceived. A faintly discernible sense of panic gradually took over his consciousness. The Pope's retreating figure suddenly stopped. In an instant, his pupils condensed and shrank, and there was a pure and flawless silvery white color between his eyes. This was the most powerful and perfect will in the entire dark world. It was like a vast galaxy, like a surging sea. With a huge oppressive will, it followed the Pope's gaze and went straight into Angel's eyes. It was irresistible. "Arcis, kill her." The Pope's deep voice sounded, incomparably majestic. Angel was motionless, but her spirit was more active than ever. The Pope's eyes were silvery white, and his eyes were shining. The clear softness in Angel's eyes gradually faded, became dark, and became silent. The two of them looked at each other. The same perfect will instantly met. At that moment, the Pope did not feel any ordinary emotion in Angel's will. It was darkness, deathly silence, coldness, numbness, madness, and incomparable despair. The Pope suddenly opened his eyes wide. In this darkness, he finally saw the truth. He knew Angel's mental state very well. With her temperament, it was impossible for her to enter the transcendent realm for the rest of her life. Even at her peak, there was still a long way to go before she could enter the transcendent realm. After encountering tribulation, her mental state had been unstable. It was already good enough that she had not regressed. It was impossible for her to continue to improve. From saintess to rebellion, to being purified, all the experiences might stimulate Angel's will, but it was impossible for her to break through to this level. There was no traditional realm in the spiritual domain. The transcendent realm was the only realm. There was a natural moat between this realm and the upper and lower realms. It was even more exaggerated than martial arts. To some extent, Angel had no room for improvement. But at this time, the willpower and spirit displayed by Angel were indeed in the transcendent realm. That vast yet incomparably condensed will was so dark, so despairing. This was not Angel's state of mind at all. Naturally, it was not Angel's will. The darkness was like a tide. With a madness and malice that almost buried the entire era, it swallowed the Pope in an instant. The whole church was completely boiling in the silent wind and rain. Like a mad bull, a vehicle soared into the air and crashed into the front door of the church. The harsh alarm and the angry roar sounded at the same time. The polar night was silent. The heavy rain fell. The fierce wind all over the sky stopped for a moment. A figure that was not very tall appeared in the air like a shadow. He raised a palm. All the airflow around him stopped in an instant. As the most elite force of the Holy Disarmament Corps, countless saint warriors reacted immediately. A saint warrior in heavy armor, who was obviously ready for battle in advance, suddenly rose into the air and shouted, "Who is it?" The stagnant ice wind shook slightly. In the silence, the body of the saint warrior who had rushed into the sky shattered silently. At this moment, it seemed that countless sharp blades had split his body. The broken pieces of flesh and blood spilled down and fell to the ground with a dull sound. Please turn the page if this chapter is not over. This picture was so clear and cruel that the Holy Disarmament Corps, which was full of fighting intent, was silent for a moment. Everyone stared at the thin figure in the air, who was not tall and could even be said to be slightly short. Black tights and silver mask. He stood there without any emotion that a human should have. In a trance, he was like a knife, sharp enough to split everything. After a moment of silence, the figure standing in the air seemed to glance at the Holy Disarmament Corps below. A hoarse and deep voice sounded, with extreme indifference. Zhongzhou State, Situ Wanjie. Where's ours? Countless curses filled with anger and murderous intent suddenly rang out. How dare you? Heresy, kill him. He should be purified. Guilty. This is blasphemy. Damn it. Amidst countless curses and roars, Tribulation stared ahead quietly. It was raining cats and dogs. In the deep night, it took him several hours to drive across a distance of nearly 1,000 miles. Tribulation's body was a little tired, but his whole soul was burning. He didn't flinch or hesitate. In the air, he took a step forward and whispered, "I'm here to pick you up." The stagnant night wind began to surge as he moved forward. Between heaven and earth, the gale from all directions continued to gather around Tribulation's body. He moved forward slowly. Countless of the most elite saint warriors around rushed forward without hesitation. The violent airflow had formed a visible tornado around Tribulation. The space was constantly shaking because of the hurricane. Tribulation glanced down. There was no emotion in his eyes. The gale burst. The wind, which had been condensed to the extreme, burst like a knife, and kept flying with the chilling, killing intent. The shrill sound of the wind kept reverberating, getting louder and louder. The airflow that kept exploding came in wisps, and each wisp carried a fatal edge. Between heaven and earth, the killing intent soared to the sky. In the corner of the church, Mellad had already stood up. Tribulation's figures slowly moved forward in the air. Countless saint warriors rose into the air and then fell. Blood, broken limbs, and minced flesh spread all the way with death. How is it possible? Mellad's eyes were extremely solemn. How can he be so strong? At this moment, in his eyes, Tribulation was the incarnation of death. As an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, Mellad could roughly see Tribulation's current state. Tribulation was not in a good state. His injury had not healed. At this moment, every time he moved with all his strength, his body might completely collapse. Moreover, his breakthrough was too fierce, so it was not perfect. Obviously, he had not solved this problem in the past few years. But it was more obvious that Tribulation had obviously stopped thinking about it. If he couldn't solve the problem, he wouldn't solve it. Now, Tribulation no longer considered any consequences. There was only killing in his heart. Mellad's body trembled slightly, and there was obvious hesitation and struggle in his eyes. In this state, Tribulation would definitely not be able to withstand one attack from him. Mellad was sure that as long as he appeared in front of him, he could beat Tribulation into a bloody mess with just one punch. Not to mention him, any ordinary invincible realm expert, even a half-step invincible realm expert, or even a peak of the thundershocking realm expert could kill tribulation with a full blow. But similarly, any invincible realm expert, close to the peak of the invincible realm, or even at the peak of the invincible realm, would not be able to withstand a blow from tribulation. In this state, anyone was qualified to bet life and death with tribulation, but he was also qualified to bet life and death with anyone. His body was extremely fragile, but at this moment, the sharpness he showed had far exceeded that of an ordinary invincible realm expert. Instead, he had steadily entered the peak of the invincible realm. This was tribulation in his normal state. There were no injuries or hidden dangers. As the strongest assassin in the dark world, this was his own sharpness. I told you, don't underestimate tribulation. His Majesty's voice sounded in the phone, extremely low. And why do you look down on him? What's the concept of breaking the existing martial arts and entering the invincible realm when he is in the chi-controlling realm? This proves that since the 4 realms of martial arts, his chi-controlling realm is the most perfect. In terms of the chi-controlling realm alone, he is even more perfect than the chosen one. Who dares to look down on such a monster? His breakthrough is so fierce that he can't exert all his strength at all. But if he doesn't care about anything, who can stop him in front of us? This is a peak assassin who can gamble with the life and death of an expert in the peak of the invincible realm. His Majesty's voice was a little emotional. The Vatican is finished. Mellad hesitated for a moment. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Stop him. His Majesty's voice suddenly became extremely cold. At least hold him back. Angel must die. I can't hold him back. Mellad smiled bitterly without hesitation. It was easy to kill such a tribulation, and it was also easy to be killed by him. But it was not easy to hold him back. It was as difficult as ascending to heaven. The will that represented the darkness surged wildly. Time was going back in a hurry. Angel looked at the Pope in front of her. In a trance, she seemed to have returned to the Holy Land more than a month ago, to that night in the hotel in the Holy Land. In the hotel room, Mellad stood beside her. In front of them were Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting. The hidden patriarch of the Lin clan began to draw his sword. The sharpness of the sword was so strong that everyone ignored everything else. The memory that seemed to have been sealed and deliberately forgotten appeared in her mind, becoming clearer and clearer. A voice sounded in her ear. Are you Tribulation's woman? Angel was shocked. In the room, Lin Fengting's sword was still moving forward. Its sharpness was at its peak, but its speed was getting slower and slower. Everything was like a completely frozen oil painting. Only her thoughts were still normal. Who are you? She looked at Qin Weibai and asked with vigilance in her eyes. I'm Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai said something nonsense. Angel became more and more vigilant. She was a little uneasy and subconsciously wanted to retreat. You should see this. Qin Weibai stretched out her palm. Suddenly, the whole world compressed toward her as she raised her palm. The surroundings were getting smaller, and the world was getting smaller. The room was constantly shrinking, completely imprisoning her in place. The opponent's will was extremely tyrannical, suppressing her in place. A hazy light appeared in Qin Weibai's palm. The light was dense and colorful, like a dream. Angel desperately wanted to look away, but her body was out of control. Her eyes were fixed on the light in front of her. The light flowed slowly, like the joys and sorrows of partings and reunions, flashing one scene after another. It was like the secular world, containing the epitome of an era, and also like martial arts. There was sword chi roaring and growing. The 6 paths of reincarnation broke out to the extreme and destroyed everything. The 10 skills of true martial arts blocked all directions, leaving no grass in the unique domain. The 24 moves of sword shattered the sky and tore the world apart. The starry sky was vast, and the shadows were flowing. Ice, wind, thunder, and fire were constantly changing. This was everything. What she wanted to see, she could see in it. Angel was extremely scared, as if she had seen the legendary Pandora's box. She knew what it meant. This was the embodiment of a strong will that was infinitely close to the extreme. The transcendent realm. In front of this light, her thoughts were extremely vague, but also extremely clear. Are you in the transcendent realm? Not yet. Qin Weibai stared at the light in her palm, and she was also in a daze. No one knew what she saw in this light. But it's very close. What do you want? Angel stepped back in vain, and her voice was gradually changing because of fear. I want to lend it to you for a while. Qin Weibai said faintly. I don't want this kind of thing. Angel almost screamed. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. It's very likely to save your life. It's not a bad thing for you. Qin Weibai smiled gently and softly. What the hell is this? Angel asked in a trembling voice. Qin Weibai was silent for a long time, and then she whispered, This is a sword light. The epitome in the sword light is an era that belongs to women, an era of revenge, the most boring era. All the memories began to become clearer and clearer. Angel thought of every expression of Qin Weibai at that time. At that time, she saw the light expanding in the other party's palm. The light was getting brighter and brighter, but she could only feel darkness. That was endless despair. The will belonging to the Pope rushed into her spiritual domain with great arrogance and determination. The Pope's pupils were contracting, but Angel's pupils were expanding. The sword light that condensed the entire era shone in her eyes. It was so fierce and so lonely. Vaguely, she remembered that she asked again at that time, What the hell is this? Qin Weibai's answer seemed equally clear at this time. The heart of despair. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 575. The most gorgeous light spread in her consciousness with the purest darkness. The light in Angel's pupils faded away quickly, becoming dimmer and dimmer. However, the sword light named Despair Heart continued to soar in her sight. Her spiritual realm and the sword light merged into one, completely stabilizing in the transcendent realm. Countless pictures kept flowing. Vitality slowly passed in Angel's body. The Pope's body began to tremble obviously. The colorful sword light appeared in his consciousness with countless pictures without warning. The pictures began to flash quickly, like a dream. Someone set off a gust of wind in the depressed deep sea. Someone gathered rainwater in the dry desert. Someone flicked his fingers and lit fire in the ice and snow, evaporating the glacier. Thunder rose between day and night, and the power of heaven fell. Someone climbed to the sky and reached the clouds. In the brightly lit city, thousands of people bowed their heads. Under the attention of the whole world, someone took over the divine sword. The tide slapped against the cliff. In front of the boulder engraved with names, someone was saying something to him. In the tide that sounded like thunder, he looked into the distance. The afterglow of the setting sun shone down, and the quiet and free couple was walking away. In the attic in the ice and snow, the girl was practicing one movement after another. The serious-looking woman corrected her every expression harshly. Smiling, raising her hand, walking steps, and swinging her waist. A golden dog appeared in the solemn and quiet airport. The heaven and earth suddenly shattered into a fist and fell down. He walked into the spacious and solemn conference room. The giant standing at the peak of power stood up at the same time. He waved his hand casually and sat down directly opposite the main seat. At the grand military parade, the most elite troops shouted, "Invincible," with fanatical expressions. One after another, the Invincible Realm experts who were powerful in the dark world bent down in embarrassment. He appeared in one picture after another. The solemn meeting, the warm banquet, and the fierce battle. The prosperous, the barren, the mountains, the rivers, the lakes, the seas, and the bustling cities in the human world. He walked over naturally, and everything was under his feet. The sword energy flowing with colorful light shone the night sky. After the sword light, the world was vast. There was heavy snow in front of the Pope. The wind and snow were messy, and countless drops of blood fell. Tens of thousands of images erupted at the same time, almost shattering all of his consciousness. The colorful sword light whistled in the wind and snow. The murderous weapon opened fire at all costs. The bright sword light pierced forward with an incomparably decisive killing intent. In the bustling city, at the highest place, a beauty in a red dress lightly jumped down. The sword intent, which seemed to be infinite reincarnation and also seemed to be exploding to the limit, filled the sky, and the colorful sword light was burning. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Facing everything, he advanced courageously in the sky full of starlight. The black waves swept up to the sky, and the huge stone engraved with glory shattered. The figure fell powerlessly into the deep sea, and the perfect figure fell from the sky. Flowers withered, trees were crushed, and the water was turbid. On the other side of the barren mountain where all the palaces had collapsed, a warm hand held a boy's hand as they walked through the wind and snow. His figure was elegant, but his voice was a little lonely. "Grandpa Lin, I want revenge." "What hatred?" "From today onwards, it was all over. They've repaid what they owed you." Ah. The Pope suddenly hugged his head with both hands and roared. 2 lines of blood shot out from his eyes. His face was twisted and pale. Countless images continued to appear in his consciousness. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of them. The cherry blossoms of North Island, Tribulation, and Angel, who were still young, appeared in his consciousness. Countless people's lives and endings flooded into his mind like a tide, and finally turned into a flame, burning his will, faith, and even soul. The vitality in Angel's eyes was getting fainter and fainter. The Pope struggled to raise his hand. In front of Angel, Arcis held a slender samurai sword and directly pierced Angel's chest. All of Angel's vitality began to break under this sword. There was no future anymore. This was real despair. She closed her eyes, and all her will began to burn like never before, as if she was going to destroy everything. A mouthful of blood sprayed directly from the Pope's mouth. His aura quickly weakened, and even his raised palm began to tremble violently. He gasped hard, and his voice was rapid and hoarse. "Purify, purify this heretic." The wind and rain were like knives. Outside the church, it was completely a hell-like charaba. Tribulation's figure moved straight forward in the air. One shadow after another began to condense around him. He was walking, and so was the shadow. The extremely cold and cruel killing intent was surging and boiling like a raging tide. Countless people in the Saint Warriors stepped on the air and flew up. Tribulation was moving. The shadow was also moving. The shadow, which perfectly replicated all of Tribulation's movements, was a machine specially designed for killing and survival. The strong wind and heavy rain rotated around the shadow, as cold as a blade. The raging fire went out. The thunder disappeared. The thick ice wall turned into powder in an instant. Blood flowed down. The broken bodies and pieces of flesh kept splashing. Tribulation's face was expressionless. It seemed that he had never been like this in his life. He moved forward seriously, killed, and was so focused. "Everyone, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page." In front of him, they were both non-entities and opponents. Ice-condensing realm, fire-flaming realm, thunder-shocking realm, peak of thunder-shocking realm, and even half-step invincible realm. Tribulation went all out to deal with every opponent. One blow. Only one blow. No matter who stood in front of him, he was turned into flying pieces. Flesh and blood. It was calm, but it moved forward with indomitable will. More and more Saint Warriors gathered, but fewer and fewer of them attacked. The Saint Warriors began to retreat. And Melad's figure finally walked over from the corner of the church with difficulty. Before today, Melad had never thought that he would be afraid of anyone. As an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, he would not be afraid of any battle under any circumstances. After all, even if he was not an opponent, he could leave the battlefield calmly. But at this moment, in the face of tribulation, although he did not want to admit it, he had to face the fear in his heart. This fear was so strong that every step he took was incomparably difficult. This was the opponent that Melad was most unwilling to face. Such a tribulation. In front of him, This was not a battle at all. It was a gamble with his life. His Majesty asked him to hold the other party back. But he couldn't hold him back at all. No one could stop tribulation in this state. Such a battle was really a moment of life and death. Bang! There seemed to be something breaking in the church in front of him. An incomparably weak but extremely sharp voice rang out. It was Angel's voice. "Who will all be buried with me?" In midair, Tribulation suddenly raised his head. The shadows around him raised their heads at the same time. The wind and rain paused slightly in the air. The sharpness that was enough to tear the night sky suddenly burst out. Tribulation reached out his hand, and the shadows around him made their moves at the same time. The wind and rain hovering in front of him gathered together at the moment he made his move. With a push of his hand, it turned into a hazy arc of light. The water rippled. The next second, blood bloomed. Mellad suddenly gritted his teeth. His body rushed up into the sky with countless residual shadows. Like a bolt of lightning, he pounced on Tribulation. The moment when it seemed to become extremely fast and then extremely slow, Tribulation glanced at him. His eyes were extremely calm, without any emotion or life or death. He put his palm up. The black shadows around him dissipated. A sharp sword chime filled with killing intent suddenly sounded between heaven and earth. With the vast heaven and earth as the sheath. With the wind and rain all over the sky as the sword. Without dodging, Tribulation stared at Mellad. His arm fell, and he directly slashed with his sword. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.